In the town of Ember Hollow, a place where the wind carried secrets and the soil remembered every footstep, they chose the wrong woman to corner. By the time they realized it, her resolve was sharper than any blade they'd ever faced, and the cost of underestimating her would echo through every mile of prairie they claimed to rule. Cassidy Wren was her name. Folks who didn't know her thought she was fragile, too slight, too quiet, too tender-eyed to survive where the land itself seemed to conspire against your next breath. But those who looked closer saw what others missed: the way her shoulders squared when the wind blew cold, the way her eyes hardened at injustice, and the raw grit hidden beneath that dust-brown hair pinned beneath a battered hat. Cassidy had come to Ember Hollow 2 springs ago with little more than a tattered valise and a letter that had long since bled its ink away from too much folding and unfolding. She'd taken work wherever she could find it, mostly cooking, mending clothes, sweeping out rooms for men who looked at her like she was more prize than person. She'd learned early not to flinch when they spoke to her like that. Instead, she watched and she remembered. Always. When she'd first met Holden Trace, she'd been balancing 3 plates on her arms at the Dusty Spur Saloon, the place where laughter curdled at dusk and fists did more talking than mouths. He'd been the only one not staring at her like she was just another evening's amusement. No, Holden Trace's eyes had held a different sort of hunger, one for a future, not a night. She'd resisted him, of course. Women like Cassidy didn't get caught up in pretty words, and rough hands turned gentle under lantern light. But Holden had shown her a softness that didn't waver with dawn. He'd taught her how to trust herself again, how to ride without looking back every other mile. In the hard country, love was a luxury she'd thought she couldn't afford, but he'd bought it for her with every callous touch, every promise that felt like hope. Hope had its own cost. The night Holden was gunned down in front of the general store, Cassidy found herself kneeling in the red dirt, her apron stained darker than blood. The sheriff had called it a dispute over land boundaries, just a man's pride and a bit of whiskey fueling reckless bullets. But Cassidy knew. She'd seen the looks, the cattle barons eyeing Holden's small spread on the edge of Ember Hollow, the rumors that he'd struck water where others had found only dust. They'd left her with nothing but a ramshackle cabin, a dwindling stash of coins, and a child that grew under her heart like a secret no one was meant to know yet. By the time her belly swelled, the whispers swelled too. A widow in name only, they said. A fool girl thinking she could keep hold of land she couldn't protect. They didn't say it to her face, but she felt it in every sideways glance at the mercantile, every closed door she passed. And now, in the long dusk of early winter, she sat on the edge of that same porch Holden had built with his own hands. Her fingers traced the notches in the wood, each one carved on days they'd dreamed big, when hope still felt like a thing they could rope and saddle. The sky bruised purple. As she waited, she'd sent word that morning, a letter pressed into the reluctant hands of Jeb Carter, the only rider she trusted. It was a desperate ask, like throwing a spark into the wind and praying it would catch. But if anyone could come back with what she needed, it was Jeb, and what she needed now wasn't food or coin or pity. It was protection. Not just for her, but for the life kicking against her ribs, a heartbeat she'd vowed to guard with everything she had left. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, the slow, steady cadence that told her whoever approached wasn't in a hurry to explain themselves. Cassidy rose, the ache in her back a reminder of what she carried and why she couldn't fail. The rider came into view, broad-shouldered, battered hat pulled low, a rifle strapped across his saddle. He reined in at the base of her porch, dust swirling around the hooves like a restless spirit. "Cassidy Wren?" She nodded once, her throat dry. "You got my letter?" He swung down, boots hitting the dirt with a thud that made her flinch. Up close, he looked older than she'd imagined, lines around his eyes like dry riverbeds, a scar tracing the length of his jaw. But his eyes were clear. Dangerous clear. "Jeb found me," he said. His voice was low, smooth as worn. "Leather. Name's Silas Ward. You said you need a husband. And fast." The wind cut across the porch, rattling the loose boards. Cassidy drew her shawl tighter, her hands trembling as she met his gaze. "I do, but not just for show. They're going to come for this land, for my child. I won't let them. I can't." Silas studied her, his eyes drifting to the curve of her belly before returning to her face. There was something in his expression she couldn't read, like he was measuring the weight of her words against some burden of his own. "And you think marrying a stranger's the best way?" "I think it's the only way," she said, her voice shaking. "If they think there's a man here willing to stand his ground, they'll think twice. Maybe that's all we need, time. Time to prove I belong here. That Holden's name still means something." Silas stepped closer. He smelled of saddle soap and sagebrush, the scent of long rides and longer silences. "I've got my own reasons for saying yes, Cassidy Wren. Don't mistake this for charity." She swallowed hard. What reasons? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his hand, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, the touch gentler than his rough voice. "Doesn't matter. You asked for a husband. You'll have one. But once we're bound, there's no walking away, not for you, not for me." Cassidy's breath hitched. She thought of Holden's grave under the lone cottonwood, the promise she'd made there when the earth had still been fresh and the nights endless with grief. She thought of the child inside her and the future he or she might never know, if she didn't find the strength to do this. "I don't run," she whispered. "Not anymore." Silas's eyes flickered approval, maybe. Or pity, she didn't care which dot. He held out his hand, calloused and steady. "Then say the words, Cassidy. Let's make this town remember what it means to respect a promise." She slipped her fingers into his, feeling how small they seemed against his rough palm. As they stood together in the deepening dusk, the wind carried away the ghosts that had lingered on that porch for too long. In their place rose something new. Not love, God knew they were far from that, but a bargain, an oath. And sometimes that was the only seed a legend needed to grow. In Ember Hollow, the night always came fast. But this time, Cassidy faced it, with her chin high and her heart hammering like a war drum, because tomorrow the fight began and she would not face it alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. In a town forgotten by time, trouble rode in with the dusk wind and planted itself in the soil like an old thorn that never healed. They chose the wrong woman to back into a corner, and by the time they'd figure that out, Cassidy Wren would already be standing over their ruin. They said Ember Hollow had no place for a woman alone, much less a woman carrying more than her own heartbeat. They said she should have packed up after Holden Trace was lowered into the ground, with the shovel scrapes still fresh on the cottonwood roots. They said plenty. Cassidy heard them all, heard the whispers slip like knives between ribs while she swept floors in the dusty Spur Saloon, her belly rounding beneath borrowed calico, her eyes fixed on nothing but tomorrow. Tomorrow was all she had. Tomorrow, and the grit under her fingernails that reminded her Holden had died trying to build something worth leaving behind. She'd be damned before she let men with cattle brands on their hearts and cruelty stitched into their spurs tear that legacy away. It was near dusk when the first threat arrived. She was on the porch, rocking herself slowly on the step Holden built by hand. Her eyes followed the dirt track down from town, where the hoofbeats rose like a heartbeat she'd been expecting. A figure took shape in the amber light, a rider, broad-shouldered and hunched in the saddle, moving at the patient pace of a man with no fear of consequence. Cassidy's hands moved over her belly, the baby inside kicking gentle reminders that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She stood when the horse came close enough to see the stranger's face. He was older than she'd pictured when she'd penned the letter and trusted Jeb Carter to get it past the road agents and ranchmen who'd just as soon see her gone. "Cassidy Wren?" he asked, voice like a gravel road under boots. She nodded. "Didn't offer him tea or lies. She had none left." "You're Silas Ward?" He swung off his horse, the leather creaking like an old hymn. He studied the cabin, the fence lines half buried in wind-blown prairie grass, the grave marker under the cottonwood that refused to lean no matter how many storms tried. "I am," he said. "Got your letter. Wasn't expecting to find you." "So what?" Cassidy's jaw set. "So ready." His eyes landed on her belly, then flicked back to her face. "Most folk who send for help don't meet the fight at the door." She stepped down the porch. She felt the splinters catch. Her hem. "I didn't send for help. I sent for a husband." A smile might have touched his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A paper marriage isn't armor, Miss Wren." Cassidy lifted her chin. "It's a name to tie to this land. A man to stand on the line if they come with rifles. A lie that holds until the truth is stronger than their greed. That's all I need." The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled too tight. The horse snorted and shifted its weight. Silas's hand stayed calm on the reins. "I don't offer." "Easy," he said, "or gentle. You marry me. You're binding yourself to every ghost I've ever dragged behind me. And I don't bury ghosts twice." She almost laughed. God, what a sound that would have been. "I don't need gentle. I need stubborn. I need a man who won't flinch when they come riding in at dusk, looking for blood and a deed they think they can buy with my bones." He nodded once, slow. "Then say it plain, right here." She laid her palm flat on her belly. "I, Cassidy Wren, take you, Silas Ward, to stand between me and the world that would chew me up and spit me out. In front of the wind and the bones in that grave." She gestured at Holden's marker, the name half faded but never forgotten. "And you?" Silas's eyes, pale and hard, softened just a hair. "I, Silas Ward, take you, Cassidy Wren, to hold the line you need held. To make my name your shield when the knives come out. No ring, no preacher. Just dirt underfoot and dusk gathering around them like the promise of a storm." She lifted her chin. "Welcome home, husband." He tipped his hat. "Welcome home, wife." They didn't touch. There'd be time for that pretense later. For now, they walked the fence-a-line, counting the broken boards and the tracks where strangers had come close enough to test her resolve. Silas asked nothing of the baby. Cassidy offered nothing. They both knew that story could wait for a fire and a bottle of whiskey that might make it easier to bleed old pain onto the floor. Night fell, and with it came the first sound of hooves on the northern trail. Cassidy watched from the porch as 3 riders stopped at the gate. They didn't dismount, didn't need to. Their shapes were cruel shadows in the moonlight, men who smiled when fear rippled through old wood walls. "Evenin', Miss Wren," called the biggest one, a voice slick as lamp oil. "Heard you took in a stray. Thought we'd ride by, welcome the new man to your troubles." Silas stepped up beside her. His hand brushed hers for the first time, just enough to steady her. "Spine, these men?" he asked under his breath. "Philip's boys," Cassidy murmured. "Work for Coyle Ranch. Think they own every creek bed between here and Dust Devil Pass." Silas nodded once. Then he spoke up, loud enough for the night to carry it. "This is my wife's land. You got business, you speak to me." Laughter drifted over the fence like poison. "That so? Well, I reckon we'll see just how much fight you got, stranger. Might be you'd like to sit down with Mr. Coyle tomorrow, talk about that deed you're holding on to. Save yourself a world of trouble." Cassidy felt her new husband's calm like a stone under her feet. "You tell your boss," Silas said. "If he wants what's mine, he can come take it himself, not send dogs to bark at the gate." The biggest one shifted in his saddle, spit tobacco into the dirt. Mighty big talk for a man new to these parts. Silas's voice dropped, colder than a January wind. "You think this land's new to me? Try me." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Cassidy could hear the wind pulling at the dry grass. Then the riders wheeled their horses and vanished back into the dark, their laughter sour and mean. Cassidy let her breath go, realized her hand was still tangled in Silas's sleeve. He didn't move to shake her off. Didn't move at all, except to turn his head just enough that she saw the edge of something fierce and unspoken behind his eyes. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, pulse like thunder in her throat. "They're not going to stop." "Neither will I," Silas said. "Go inside. Bar the door. Tomorrow we make this place harder to take than it's worth." Inside, Cassidy sat by the cold hearth, her hands splayed on her belly. She felt the baby shift life insisting itself into a world that would rather see it starve. The fire hadn't been lit yet, but the room already felt warmer than it had in months. Upstairs, she heard Silas moving, putting his things in the spare room that would now be the room of her husband, her shield. She didn't know his scars yet, or why he'd ridden so far to stand next to her in the dark. She didn't need to not yet. When the wind rattled the windows, Cassidy smiled for the first time in a long time. Let it come, let them come. She had a name now, and a man with iron in his bones. And tomorrow, they'd see just how far they'd have to go to break her. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Cassidy barely slept. The wind hummed through the cabin's cracks like an old lullaby, but every creak of the floorboards overhead reminded her she was not alone, not anymore. Somewhere in the dark above, Silas Ward lay awake too. She could feel it in the way the silence pressed down, thick with the weight of a new bargain neither of them fully understood yet. Before dawn, she was up, moving slow so the baby wouldn't wake with a sharp kick against her ribs. She dressed by lantern light, pulling on Holden's old coat, still smelling faintly of sweat and cedar, and stepped out onto the porch. Frost clung to the fence rails, the ground hard as iron beneath her boots. She felt every nail that needed hammering, every hinge that groaned its warning. "You're not ready." But she pushed the fear down, tucked it under her ribs next to the life growing there. A horse nickered softly out near the barn. She found Silas there, sleeves rolled up despite the bite in the air, his broad back bent over a broken gate. He didn't turn when she approached, just kept working the hinge back into place, each strike of the hammer echoing through the stillness like a promise. "You sleep?" she asked. He paused, straightened up, wiped a smear of oil from his cheek with the back of his hand. "No, me neither." Cassidy stepped closer, boots crunching frost. This place, Holden was always fixing something. Could never rest if he knew the fence was down or the barn roof needed patching. Drove me half mad. She smiled a little, small and sad. "Now I understand." Silas's eyes flicked to hers, pale and sharp under the brim of his hat. "You loved him?" She felt the truth catch in her throat, raw and stubborn. "I did." He nodded once, as if that was all the explanation he needed. He went back to the gate, driving the hinge deep into the post. Cassidy watched the muscles flex under his shirt, the way his hands moved efficient, practiced, like he'd built things just to watch others tear them down again. She wondered what ghosts whispered in his ear when the night got too long. When the gate swung true, Silas wiped his hands on his trousers and turned to her. "We need more than a gate to keep them out. Those men last night, they'll come back. Sooner than you think." "I know." She crossed her arms over her belly, feeling the baby shift in protest. "You got a plan?" Silas looked at the horizon, where the first fingers of dawn clawed at the darkness. "I do, but you're not gonna like it. Try me. We ride into town, today, before they can come sniffing around again." Cassidy stiffened. "I can't show my face in town with you yet. They'll know it's a lie." Silas stepped closer, his voice calm, the way a man speaks to a horse about to bolt. Better they see us together than see you alone. You're the story they want to tear down. I'm the story they're gonna choke on." She swallowed, the acid in her throat tasting like old fear. "They'll talk about us, about the baby." "Let them," Silas said. "Talk's cheap. You know it ain't. Fear. If they see you've got me standing here, see I'm willing to bleed for your piece of dirt, they'll think twice before they try to buy it out from under you." He brushed past her, the warmth of him a shock in the cold air. She turned, watching him lead his horse from the barn. It struck her then how strange it felt to see a man moving around this land like he belonged, like he meant to fight for every fence post and patch of hard earth. "Silas?" She called. He stopped, one boot in the stirrup, his eyes catching the light of the rising sun. "Yeah? If this goes bad? If they call your bluff?" He smiled sharp, tired, not unkind. "Then they'll find out it ain't a bluff." They rode the 2 miles into Ember Hollow as the sun broke free of the horizon. The town looked smaller than Cassidy remembered, smaller and meaner. Every window a watchful eye waiting for her to stumble. Folks turned their heads when they passed, whispers rising like smoke behind them. She could almost feel the old gossip lifting its head. "That's Holden Trace's girl. The widow with no ring. The fool who thinks she can stand against men with money in their pockets and hate in their spurs." But today she had Silas beside her, big as a bad rumor, the rifle on his saddle a promise, his silence a blade honed over miles of unforgiving country. She felt stronger with him there, strong enough to swing down from her horse and march up the steps to the land office like she'd done it 100 times. Inside, old Cyrus Dunlop looked up from behind his cluttered desk, his eyes squinting through dusty glasses. "Miss Wren," he drawled, voice dripping like molasses gone sour. "And this must be the man we've heard about." Silas didn't smile, didn't move, just nodded once, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his scarred jaw. "Name's Ward, Ward." Dunlop leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking like bones ready to break. "Funny thing, you showing up right when the Coil boys start asking about the Trace claim. You two think marriage papers are gonna scare them off?" Cassidy stepped forward, chin high. "They're not papers, they're real." Dunlop snorted. "Real as dust in the wind, girl. Coil's got men." Silas's hand slammed down on the desk so hard the inkwell jumped, splattering black across the ledger. The clerk went pale, his mouth snapping shut. "Coil's got men," Silas said, voice low and even. "And I've got graves enough behind me to remind me how men like him end up." Silence fell so thick Cassidy could hear her own heartbeat pounding behind her ribs. Dunlop looked at her, then at Silas, then back again. His tongue darted over dry lips. "You want to file the marriage license today?" "Today," Cassidy said. "And you'll see it posted before dusk." Dunlop nodded, fumbling for the papers, quill scratching across the yellowed parchment. Cassidy signed her name with fingers that only trembled once. When Silas took the quill, his hand was steady as stone. When he looked up, something flickered behind his eyes, something old and dangerous that made her wonder just how many men he'd buried to earn that calm. "Done." Dunlop wheezed. "God help you both." Outside, the street felt different, hotter, meaner. The sun glared down like a judgment. Across the way, the saloon doors banged open, and 3 ranch hands from Coil's outfit spilled out, their eyes finding her, then Silas. They didn't smile. One tipped his hat, mock polite. "Afternoon, Mrs. Ward. Or is it Trace? Hard to keep track when a woman's bed stays warm enough for 2 names." Silas moved before Cassidy could speak, his boots thudding across the street, hands fisted at his sides. The biggest of the 3 spat in the dirt, grinning through yellow teeth. "You gonna teach me some respect, stranger?" Silas didn't answer. He hit the man once, one punch, fast and precise, like splitting a log with a single swing. The ranch hand dropped to his knees, blood gushing from his nose. The others backed away, laughing nervously, but Silas's eyes pinned them like bugs on a board. Next one who spits her name gets to chew dirt through a wired jaw. You understand? Me? No one answered. They scattered, boots clattering against the boards. Silas turned to Cassidy, his chest heaving slow and measured. You're making enemies, she said, voice quiet but steady. He wiped the blood from his knuckles on his trousers. Good, makes it easier to know where they stand. She wanted to ask what made a man like him so ready to fight for a stranger's piece of dirt, but the words caught behind her teeth. Some answers were better earned than given. They rode home with the sun at their backs and the smell of trouble thick as gun oil in the air. At the cabin, Cassidy dismounted first, her knees trembling only a little. Silas walked the perimeter, checking the fence lines, the barn doors, the loose boards she'd given up nailing shut when hope ran out. He came back to her on the porch, his shadow falling over her like a shield. We'll need more than strong words and old nails, he sighed. They'll test us tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they'll come. Cassidy lifted her chin. Let them. Silas's mouth curved, half a smile, half a warning. Get some sleep, Mrs. Ward. Tomorrow we build more than a fence. We build a reason they'll wish they never came. Inside as she lay down, wind carried the sound of hammer strikes into the night. Silas working under moonlight, nailing her fears into the wood grain, one board at a time. And deep in her chest, where the baby turned slow and restless, Cassidy knew this was only the beginning. They'd chosen the wrong woman to push, and the wrong man to stand beside her. She drifted into uneasy dreams, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the ghost of a promise. Tomorrow she'd fight for her land, her child, her name. And the world would learn just how long the prairie remembered those who tried to break her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Cassidy woke before the first light cracked the horizon. The air inside the cabin was cold enough to bite her skin, but it was the sound outside that made her sit up straight. The rhythmic thud of hammer on wood, metal scraping against stone. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, pressing a hand to her belly where the baby kicked, as if to say, "We're still here." Through the frosted window she saw Silas. He was a dark shape moving along the fence line, driving nails, resetting posts that had leaned too long in the wind. He worked without pause, each strike echoing across the yard like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Cassidy pulled Holden's coat around her shoulders and stepped outside. The dawn was slow to come, dragging its bruised purple light across the prairie. Frost glittered on the fence rails, caught in Silas's hair and beard. He didn't look up when she approached, but he knew she was there. She could tell by the way his shoulders shifted, by the way he angled his body slightly toward hers. "You ever sleep?" she asked softly. "Plenty," he said, pounding another nail. "Just not when there's work to do." Cassidy leaned against the fence, watching him. This place was Holden's dream. Every fence post he drove himself. He used to say the land would hold us if we held it right back. Silas's hammer paused mid-strike. He turned to her then, eyes pale as a winter sky, a line of sweat freezing on his brow. "You loved him, I did," she said. "And I love what he left me. But loving a ghost doesn't keep the wolves from the door." He nodded once, the line of his jaw tightening. "Then we keep the wolves out. Together." She didn't know what to say to that, so she bent down and lifted a rail that had fallen behind the fence line. Her hands were raw by the time they finished, splinters lodged in her palms. But the fence stood straight by dawn's full break. Silas tied the last strand of wire tight, testing its hold. Then he looked at her hands. "Show me." She resisted, but he took her wrists gently, turning them palm up. He worked each splinter out with the tip of his hunting knife, the blade so sharp she barely felt it. His fingers were warm against her skin, rough but careful. When he finished, he wrapped her hands in a clean cloth from his saddlebag. You don't have to. I do, he cut in. Because you can't hold a rifle if you can't close your hands. And you'll need to. Cassidy's throat tightened. I've never shot at a man. Silas's eyes didn't flinch. Then you better learn to aim straight. This land isn't yours if you're too kind to defend it. They ate what little they had left that morning. Stale bread, thin coffee, a few strips of cured meat. Silas moved around the cabin with a quiet purpose, checking window latches, securing the door with new iron braces he'd found in the barn. Every time he passed near her, Cassidy felt the weight of what he was doing for her, for a child that wasn't his, for a name he hadn't even spoken until she'd forced it into the world. Outside, the day stayed cold and mean. She heard the first riders before she saw them, hooves crunching through the frozen grass, the low murmur of men who knew the shape of fear and how to bend it to their will. Cassidy stepped onto the porch, her shotgun balanced in her arms, her breath clouding in the air. 3 of them again, just like the night before. But these weren't Philip's boys. She recognized one of them, Eli Matson, Coyle's foreman, his smile always a shade too wide. The others were just shapes draped in oilskin dusters, rifles glinting across their saddles. "Morning, Mrs. Ward," Eli drawled, like they were old friends discussing the weather. "Heard you took yourself a new man. Mighty fast for a woman mourning her dear departed Holden, don't you think?" Cassidy's hands tightened on the shotgun. "What do you want, Eli?" Eli leaned forward in his saddle, the grin never touching. His eyes, "Coyle sent me to make an offer. Last one you're gonna get. Sell him the claim, pack your bags, and ride out before the ground thaws. He'll even throw in a wagon so you and your family don't have to walk." Silas stepped up beside her, arms crossed over his chest. "And if she says no?" Eli's grin widened. "Then we come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we come back. And when we do, this fence won't stop us." Silas looked at the fence, the rough posts they'd reset with their bleeding hands. He nodded once like he was weighing the worth of every nail and board. Then he stepped down the porch steps, boots crunching frost. Eli shifted, hand drifting to the rifle at his side. "Easy now," Eli said, voice tightening. "No sense doing something stupid." Silas stopped just short of Eli's horse, looking up at the man with a calm so cold it could cut glass. "You come back through that gate again. You best bring a shovel." Eli's nostrils flared. Big talk for a hired gun-playing husband to a knocked-up widow. Cassidy's heart stuttered at that word widow, so sharp and ugly now that it was being twisted against her. But Silas didn't blink. He reached up, one hand gripping Eli's boot. In one brutal yank, he pulled the man clean out of the saddle. Eli hit the frozen dirt with a grunt, scrabbling for his rifle. But Silas's boot found his hand before he could reach it. Silas crouched low, voice like gravel. "Tell Coyle she's done being polite. Next time you come back here, you bring him, not dogs with borrowed spurs, him." He stood, letting Eli crawl back to his horse. The other riders didn't move. They'd seen enough to know Silas meant every word. When they rode off, Cassidy watched their shapes grow small on the trail. She turned to Silas, but the question died in her throat. He was standing at the fence, staring at the horizon, his jaw clenched like stone. She realized then that he wasn't just angry, he was ready. Ready for whatever storm was coming, even if it broke every bone he had left unbroken. Inside, she found herself shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the choice she'd made when she asked for him. She touched the letters still hidden in her trunk, the ink fading now. Holden's words a memory that no longer felt like enough. That night, the wind howled around the cabin like a wolf denied its kill. Cassidy sat by the window, shotgun across her knees. Silas sat on the floor, cleaning his revolver piece by piece, the metal glinting in the lamplight. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Outside, somewhere beyond the fence line, they could hear voices drifting in the dark, men testing the edges of her resolve. When she looked at Silas, she saw the truth of the man she'd married. Not a savior, not a hero, just a man too stubborn to run, too scarred to fear what other men could do to him. And in that silence, she felt her own spine straighten. Let them come, she thought, pressing her palm to the baby's restless kicks. Let them come and see how a woman with nothing left to lose fights for what's hers. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows across the log walls. In the deepest part of her mind, she heard Holden's voice, soft, forgiving. But she didn't look back at that memory anymore. She looked at Silas, the stranger who'd given her more than a name. He'd given her a chance to stand unbroken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The hours dragged like a knife pulled slow across old scars. Cassidy stayed by the window, the shotgun heavy across her lap, the lamplight flickering shadows across her face. Silas sat in the chair across from her, gun cleaned and holstered now. Eyes half-lidded but far from sleep. Every few minutes, the wind rattled the shutters, and Cassidy's hand would tighten on the stock until her knuckles ached. Each gust reminded her they were still out there, somewhere past the fence line, waiting for a crack in the courage that held this place together. She thought about Holden, how he'd stand in this same spot when the storms rolled in. One hand pressed to the glass, the other around her waist, whispering soft lies that everything would be fine. Silas didn't whisper. He didn't touch her unless he had to. His presence was a wall, solid, rough, impossible to ignore. And right now, that wall was all that stood between her and the ruin waiting in the dark. Cassidy shifted her weight, feeling the baby roll restless inside her. She winced, pressing her palm to her belly, and Silas's eyes snapped fully open. You all right? She managed a nod. Baby's just reminding me it's still here. Wants to fight its way out already, I reckon. A ghost of a smile flickered across Silas's mouth. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How far along are you? Cassidy hesitated. She'd never spoken the number out loud, not since Holden's grave had swallowed every plan they'd made. 7 months, give or take. Silas's eyes dropped to her belly. For a moment she thought he might reach out, but his hands stayed clasped. You got a name? She felt her throat close around the word. Not yet. Holden wanted a boy. Said we'd name him after his father. She forced out a short, brittle laugh. But I don't think the land cares much what you want. Silas's gaze held hers, steady, searching. Boy or girl, don't matter. It'll have a place to stand. That's what we're fighting for. Before she could answer, they both heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps in the yard. Cassidy sucked in a breath, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Silas stood slow, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. He moved to the door, easing. It opened a crack. Cold air spilled in, carrying the sharp scent of horses, sweat, and something else, smoke. Cassidy's fingers went numb around the shotgun. They're here, she whispered. Silas didn't speak. He stepped out onto the porch, boots silent against the old boards. Cassidy followed, the night air like a slap across her face. In the yard, a lone figure stood by the fence line, a boy, no more than 15, skinny as a switch, holding a torch that guttered in the wind. Who's that? Cassidy hissed. Silas shook his head. Trouble. The boy's voice cracked as he called out, too loud for the hour. Mrs. Ward? Mr. Ward? Cassidy stepped to Silas's side. What do you want? The boy shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the barn. Coyle says you got till sunrise. You hand over the deed, or the fire comes down. Cassidy's mouth went dry. Fire? The boy nodded, like he hated every word. Philip's boys got barrels of oil. Says they'll torch your fences first, then the barn, then the house. Silas's voice was low, lethal. And you? What's your part in this? The boy's eyes shone wet in the torchlight. They told me to come warn you. Said they'd shoot my pa's cattle if I didn't. Cassidy stepped forward, her fury burning hotter than her fear. What's your name? Caleb. She held his gaze. You did right, Caleb. Now run home to your paya. Tell him to lock his doors and keep his cattle penned. The boy's breath hitched. You gonna fight 'em? Silas answered for her. We're gonna make 'em wish they'd never set foot on this dirt. Caleb looked like he wanted to say more, but he turned and bolted into the night, the torchlight bouncing like a dying star. Silence closed in behind him, thick and final. Cassidy turned to Silas. We can't fight fire, not with 2 guns and a promise. Silas stared at the fence line, the shadows beyond. No, but we can make it cost them. They moved through the yard like ghosts, checking every barrel, every trough. Silas rigged buckets along the porch, filled them from the well until Cassidy's arms burned. They dragged old wet sacks from the barn, nailed them to the fence rails nearest the house. By the time they finished, the sky was beginning to lighten. In the east dot inside, Cassidy stoked the fire, boiled coffee black as sin. Her hands trembled when she handed Silas the tin cup. He took it without looking at her, eyes fixed on the window where dawn leaked through like blood from an old wound. What happens when they come? She asked. Silas sipped the coffee, grimaced. You keep the baby close. Stay behind the barrels. If they push the fence line, you shoot. You don't think, you don't warn, you shoot. She flinched. I can't, you can. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. They'll burn you out if you don't. They'll run you into the dirt and leave you with nothing. You know that. You've always known that. She closed her eyes, her breath shaking. I'm not like you. Silas's voice softened, just enough to break her heart. No, you're better. But you do what you have to. And when this is over, when they're gone, you'll still be better. A sound outside hooves, the creak of wagon wheels. Cassidy's blood turned to ice. She looked at Silas, who set down his cup and stood. It's time, he said. Together they stepped onto the porch. The horizon was rimmed with red, fire not yet lit, but promised in the shapes waiting just beyond the fence. Men on horseback. Men with rifles. And in the center, astride a big bay gelding, sat Coyle himself. He was older than Cassidy remembered, skin like old parchment, eyes mean as a rattler's. He raised one gloved hand in greeting, mock polite. Mrs. Ward, I see you got my message. Silas's voice was steel wrapped in calm. You come to talk, or you come to die? Coyle's grin widened, full of yellow teeth and hate. I come to get what's mine. Cassidy felt the shotgun slip in her sweaty hands. Silas stepped down from the porch, boots crunching on the frozen dirt. He moved slow, deliberate. Not reckless. Just ready. You want this land? Silas called out. Then come take it. The men shifted in their saddles, uneasy. They'd expected fear, pleading, not this. Not a man standing bare-chested against the storm. Coyle's eyes narrowed. You're just a hired gun. This ain't your fight. Silas's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. It is now. A single shot cracked the dawn open like an egg. One of the riders fell from his horse, dust puffing up around his body. Cassidy's breath caught. She hadn't seen Silas draw. She hadn't seen him move. The yard exploded in noise hooves pounding. Men shouting, fire roaring to life on the far fence line. Cassidy stumbled back, her shoulders slamming into the doorframe. She raised the shotgun, sights wavering. Silas moved like a shadow, firing, reloading, firing again. Each shot a promise. Not today. Not here. Flames licked up the dry grass, but the wet sacks slowed it. Smoke curled around the porch, thick and choking. Cassidy fired once, twice, missing both times, but driving the riders back from the house. She heard Silas roar something over the crack of gunfire. His voice lost in the chaos. A figure broke from the smoke, running straight for her. She leveled the shotgun, her breath frozen in her chest. The figure stumbled. Young, small. Caleb. Get inside, she screamed, grabbing his arm. He collapsed against her, sobbing. They made me. They made me show em where the oil was. Please, I didn't. Quiet, she hissed, dragging him behind the barrels. Stay down, Caleb, stay down. Outside, Silas's gun clicked empty. She saw him drop the revolver, pull a rifle. From the porch rail, he fired once, twice. A rider screamed. Another fell, but there were too many. Always too many. Cassidy felt the world slow, like the seconds were tar, dragging her heart through each breath. She lifted the shotgun, sights finding a shadow on horseback. Ely. He grinned through the smoke, a torch raised high. She pulled the trigger. The kick slammed her shoulder back, but the shot found him square in the chest. He tumbled backward. The torch sputtering in the dirt. The fire died where it fell. A small mercy. A small victory. Silas's shout ripped her eyes back to the yard. He was down on one knee, blood running from a gash along his side. Coyle rode closer, his rifle aimed at Silas's head. Cassidy's scream was lost in the roar of her heartbeat. She grabbed the shotgun, swung it up empty. Her hands fumbled for another shell. Too slow. Too slow. Coyle grinned down at Silas. Any last words, hero? Silas's voice was a ragged snarl. Yeah, go to hell. A crack split the air louder than any gunshot before it. Coyle's eyes went wide. He slumped sideways off his horse. Dead before he hit the dirt. Cassidy looked down, her hands still empty. The shot hadn't come from her. Behind the porch rail, Caleb stood shaking. Silas's discarded revolver clutched in both hands. Smoke curled from the barrel, his eyes wide and wet with terror. Silas pushed himself to his feet, clutching his side. The other riders, leaderless, shaken, turned and fled, hooves pounding a retreat through the burning dawn. Cassidy dropped the shotgun and ran to Silas, catching him as he stumbled. Caleb lowered the gun, breath hitching like a sob. Together, they stood in the smoking yard, the prairie stretching wide and unforgiving around them. The fence was scorched, the barn singed, but the house still stood. The land was theirs for now. Silas leaned into her, his voice rough against her ear. Told you, they'd have to burn me out. Cassidy held him tight, her own breath shaking. Not today, not ever. In the bruised light of dawn, they were nothing but two battered souls bound by dirt, blood, and a promise no fire could burn away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Silas woke to the smell of smoke that wasn't burning their house down this time. He could taste it on his tongue. Pine, sweet and sharp, the kind of smoke that lingered in your hair for days. Somewhere in the haze of half-sleep, he thought. It might be a dream, but when he forced his eyes open, he saw Cassidy crouched by the hearth, coaxing the fire to life with a steady hand. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, dark in the glow. She looked strong, the kind of strong that gets forged in the belly of storms. His side ached like the devil had taken a bite out of him, but he pushed himself up anyway. He could feel the bandage where Cassidy had stitched him up. It itched under his ribs, a reminder that blood was easy to spill and hard to keep. She turned when she heard him shift. Her eyes went to his wound, then his face. You're awake. Thought you'd sleep the day off. He grunted, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold, the boards rough under his bare feet. Can't afford to sleep. Not yet. Cassidy poked at the logs, sending a scatter of sparks up the chimney. The fence'll hold for now. The barn'll need new beams where the fire caught, but we're not digging graves today. Silas barked a laugh that turned into a cough. He winced, pressing a hand to his side. Not yet. But they'll be back. The men Coyle left behind won't just ride off. Somebody else'll fill his boots. Cassidy stood and crossed to him, pressing a tin mug of coffee into his hand. It tasted bitter and burnt, but it was warm. She sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that her knee brushed his thigh. He noticed her hands then raw, split at the knuckles. Hands that had gripped a shotgun until the recoil bruised her shoulder. They know now, she said quietly. They know this land won't bow to them. Maybe that buys us time. Time's a coin folks like them spend easy. Silas stared at the fire. He could still see the flash of Coyle's rifle, the pale terror in Caleb's eyes when he'd pulled the trigger. A boy with blood on his hands before he'd even grown whiskers. Cassidy followed his gaze, as if she saw the same ghosts. He's asleep in the barn, refuses to leave. Says he wants to earn his keep. He's a kid, not a ranch hand. He's more than that now. Her voice cracked on the words. He saved you. Silas drank deep, the coffee scalding his tongue, grounding him in the now. You regret it? She frowned. Regret what? Sending for me. Dragging a stranger into your storm. Cassidy's eyes met his, unflinching. You think I dragged you? Silas, you rode in here with nothing but that gun and your shadows. If anything, you dragged yourself. He smirked at that, but it felt wrong on his lips. He set the cup aside, bracing his hands on his knees. What happens next? Cassidy leaned forward, close enough that he could feel the heat of her breath. Next we patch what's broken. We put the fence back up. Fix the barn. Plant what we can before spring's done with us. And when they come again, he finished for her, voice like gravel. We remind them they're not the only ones who know how to bury a man. Outside, a crow called from the cottonwood that shaded Holden's grave. Cassidy's eyes flicked to the window, soft and sharp all at once. You ever bury someone you loved? Silas's breath caught. He stared into the fire, the flames dancing like old sins. Yeah. Who? He didn't answer right away. The words lodged deep, heavy as lead. When he spoke, it felt like digging. Up a corpse he'd long since tried to forget. Brother. Younger than me, smart, wild, thought he could outrun every bullet. Cassidy's hand found his where it clenched on his knee. She didn't flinch at the old scars on his knuckles. What happened? Silas's jaw tightened. I happened. I taught him how to shoot, how to fight. Made him think he was untouchable. Then one night some ranch hands cornered him over a card game. He thought he could talk his way out. He was wrong. She squeezed his hand, the touch warm, real. That's not on you. He looked at her, and for a heartbeat he almost believed. Her, almost. But guilt had a long memory, longer than any prairie. He pulled his hand away gently and stood. Pain lanced through his side, but he gritted his teeth. Gonna check the fence. Make sure no one's come sniffing around. Cassidy stood too. I'll come with you. Stay with the boy. He trusts you, and the fence don't care what I regret. He shrugged into his coat, the motion dragging. At his stitches, Cassidy's eyes narrowed. You open that wound again, I'll stitch it with a branding iron. He barked a laugh that felt real this time. Fair enough. The wind had teeth that morning. It scraped across the burned patches of earth, rattling the scorched fence posts like bones. Silas limped along the line, boots crunching frost, eyes sharp for any sign of fresh tracks. He found hoof prints near the western edge-old, muddled with the marks of cattle. No fresh cuts in the wire, no footprints heading toward the house. He stood there for a long while, hand braced on the top rail, staring out at the horizon. The land rolled on forever, 1,000 shades of dead grass and stubborn green shoots fighting their way through the frost. He hated it and loved it in equal measure, how it gave nothing freely, how it asked you to bleed for every inch. Behind him, he heard the crunch of boots. Cassidy. He didn't turn. You didn't stay with the boy, he said. Cassidy's breath misted beside him. He's sleeping, dreamless, I hope. They stood side by side, shoulders brushing. She looked smaller in Holden's coat, but her eyes were the same fierce steel that had met him that first dusk. He felt her watching him, waiting for him to say something worth hearing. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. He nodded once. "Sooner or later, they always do." She turned her head, studying his profile. "Why'd you say yes to my letter?" He snorted. "Thought I'd find a widow needing a name. Not a woman ready to light her world on fire. And if you had," Silas met her gaze, "I have given her the name and ridden on." Cassidy's lips curved, half smile, half sorrow. "So, what made you stay?" He looked back at the prairie. "Same thing that keeps this land from blowing away, roots." A shiver ran through her, but not from the wind. "You got roots here now?" He didn't answer, didn't need to. His hand drifted, almost unconsciously, to rest just above her belly. Not touching, just close enough that she felt the heat of him through the coat. They stood like that until the wind lost its bite. And when they walked back to the cabin, they walked shoulder to shoulder, like two people who knew the world would come for them again, and like hell it'd find them waiting alone. Inside, Caleb stirred awake in the corner by the hearth. Cassidy knelt by him, murmuring words Silas couldn't hear. The boy's eyes were wide, haunted, but there was something there now that hadn't been before. Flint under the fear, an ember waiting for a spark. Silas leaned against the doorframe, feeling the ache in his side thrum like a drumbeat. He watched the woman he'd married without love, watched the boy who'd killed to save him. He felt the walls of that cabin, rough logs that had weathered more storms than any of them, and he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was how a man outran his ghosts. Not by fleeing them, but by building walls too strong for them to slip through. Cassidy caught his eye, her hand still on Caleb's shoulder. She mouthed two words he'd never heard from her lips before. "Thank you." Silas only nodded. Outside, the prairie whispered its old threats. But inside, they were together. And together was enough to fight another day. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Silas was the first one awake that morning, though calling it morning felt generous. The dark still pressed at the windows, moonlight silvering the frost along the sills. He sat by the hearth, boots unlaced, one hand wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. His stitches itched like a promise that healing would hurt before it helped. He welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was still alive, that this place hadn't taken him yet. Cassidy lay on the cot nearby, curled around her belly, breathing slow and deep. He watched her for a long time, the way a man studies the horizon for signs of a storm. Even in sleep, she looked stubborn. The shadows under her eyes were dark, but they didn't make her seem weak. They made her real. A woman who'd traded fear for fury because there was no other choice left. He heard Caleb shift in the loft above, the boy's restless dreams creaking the floorboards. Silas wondered what ghosts haunted him now. Ayla's face, pale and slack where the bullet found him. Or Coyle toppling from his horse, eyes wide with the finality of it. Death was an unforgiving teacher. Caleb had learned that early. Silas shifted, setting the mug aside. He moved to the window, peeled back the curtain just enough to see the yard. The fence line was black smudges against a bruised sky. Beyond that, the prairie rolled away into dark. He knew that dark well, knew the men who waited in it, men who'd measure the hours before they struck again. Greed was patient, but never forever. He heard Cassidy stir behind him, the rustle of blankets, a soft sound that might have been his name. "You should sleep," he murmured without turning. "Could say the same for you." Her voice was rough from dreams. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "The boy's still out?" Silas nodded. "He'll wake when the sun does, same as every animal on this land." Cassidy pushed herself to her feet, wincing. At the way her back pulled, she joined him by the window. Their reflections blurred in the glass, shadows of themselves. You think they'll come today? They're licking their wounds. Doesn't mean they're gone. She leaned her forehead against the cold pane. I hate the waiting. The wondering what they'll take next. Silas's hand drifted to the back of her neck, warm and solid. He didn't know why he did it. He wasn't a man given to tenderness. But in that moment, she didn't pull away. They'll take what we let them, no more. She turned to him then, her eyes bright in the pale light. Why are you here, Silas? Really, no lie. No story you think I want to hear. He let his hand drop, looked past her shoulder to the fire that had burned down to embers. Because there's places a man can ride to outrun his name. But there's nowhere to outrun what you've done. Or what you didn't do. Her brow furrowed. What didn't you do? He looked back at her. Save the ones I should've. She didn't ask who, didn't have to. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat of her, the steady thrum of her pulse under the skin. You're saving us now. A hollow laugh caught in his chest. Maybe, for now. But when they come again, then we stand again, she cut in. Her hand found his rough palm against rough palm. If you're waiting for me to run, you'll be waiting a long time. They stood like that until Caleb's voice drifted down from the loft, thin and uncertain. It snowed, you see it? Silas and Cassidy turned to the boy's tousled head peering over the rail. Sure enough, when they opened the door, the yard was dusted white. Just enough to hide the scorched earth, to make it look like something. Pure still lived there. Caleb bounded down the ladder, his eyes wide. You think they'll come when it's snowing? Silas closed the door, shutting out the wind. They'll come when they're ready. Weather don't mean much to men with empty pockets and mean hearts. Cassidy ruffled the boy's hair. He flinched but didn't pull away. We'll be ready too. The day passed in the quiet that only happens when you're waiting for violence. To find you again. Silas worked the fence line with Caleb at his side, showing him how to hammer the nails true, how to test the posts for weakness. The boy listened more than he spoke, but every so often, Silas would catch him watching the horizon like he expected ghosts to come riding over it. Cassidy stayed close to the cabin. She cleaned the rifle again and again until the rag came away. Clean. She made stew from what they had left: beans, dried venison, the last of the carrots she'd buried in the root cellar. When they ate, they didn't say grace. They didn't thank any god that might be listening. They thanked the fence that held, the boards that didn't burn, the bullets that found the right hearts. When dusk slid its long fingers over the prairie, Silas set Caleb to stacking kindling by the hearth. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching. Snow that was already melting into mud. Cassidy followed him out, wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders. You see anything? She asked. He shook his head. Not yet. She looked at him, her breath a cloud in the cold. You're not the same as when you rode up that first night. He tilted his head, a wry smile tugging at his mouth. How's that? You were looking for somewhere to hide. Now you're looking for something to stand for. Silas turned to the dark beyond the fence. He saw shapes out there, sometimes ghosts, maybe, or just the land's memory of all the men who'd died trying to claim it. I ain't a good man, Cassidy. You're our man now. Her words hit him harder than a bullet. He wanted to argue, but the door opened behind them and Caleb stuck his head out, eyes wide. Riders from town, coming fast. Silas's gun was in his hand before the boy finished speaking. He stepped to the edge of the porch, boots planted. Cassidy dropped, her hand to the pistol she'd strapped under her coat. They waited. Always waiting. The horses broke through the dusk, 3 of them, lathered and blowing. Not Coyle's men, these were townsfolk. Jeb Carter at the front, his hat pulled low, his eyes shifting left and right like he expected to catch a bullet. Misses. Ward, Silas, Jeb called, reining up just shy of the porch. You best pack up what you can carry. They're gathering in town. Talking about coming tonight, burning you out proper. They don't care who they hit now. Whole damn ranchers. Circles in on it. Cassidy's jaw clenched. How many? 6, maybe more. Phillips boys. Some drifters they hired. Folks you wouldn't trust to tie your horse, let alone hold a torch. Silas's voice was iron. And you? You come to watch? Jeb bristled. I come to warn. Don't paint me the same as them. I stood up for Holden, didn't I? Stood up. For you too, when folks said you'd lose the place before the first frost. Cassidy's breath came hard and sharp. So what do you want us to do? Run? Jeb's eyes flicked to Silas, then the boy, then back to her. I want you to live. You take the wagon, the child, what food you got? Ride south, cross the pass before the snow traps you. Start over. Silas stepped off the porch. The snow squelched under his heel. Not leaving. Jeb spat into the yard, frustration raw in his voice. Then you're gonna die, all of you. Cassidy stepped down beside Silas, her fingers brushing his coat sleeve. Then we die standing on our own dirt. Jeb looked at them like he was staring at ghosts already buried. He turned his horse without another word, spurring it hard back toward town. His companions followed. The echo of hooves faded into the dark. Caleb stood in the doorway, wide-eyed. We really gonna stay? Silas looked at the boy, then Cassidy. Then the cabin. The wind rattled the fence, whispering old threats. We stay, he said. And when they come, they'll find out the prairie remembers. Cassidy's hand closed around his. Her fingers were cold, strong. Then let him come. She said dot, and in the dark that followed, they stood together on the porch, a woman. A gunslinger. A boy too young to carry what he'd done, and waited for the world to come for them one last time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story. For you. The storm broke just before midnight. Not a storm of thunder or lightning, those they'd weathered before. This was the kind that came on 4 hooves and boots packed with malice, riding the hush of the prairie like ghosts in the snow, inside. The cabin, the fire was banked low. Cassidy sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. Silas stood near the door, the rifle balanced against his good shoulder, eyes fixed on the window as if he could will the darkness to speak. Caleb was curled in the corner, knees to his chest. He hadn't said a word since Jeb's warning. He'd just cleaned the shotgun and set it by the door, then sank into himself. But his eyes were open, flicking from Silas to Cassidy, then back to the shadows beyond the window. The first hoofbeats came like a heartbeat she didn't want to hear. Slow. Patient, Silas shifted, rolling his shoulder where the bullet wound had only half healed. Cassidy's breath caught in her throat. She set the mug down, the clink of ceramic loud as a gunshot in that tight room. Stay inside, Silas said. His voice was low, unbending. Keep the boy low. If they come through the door, you shoot. Cassidy's jaw clenched. I'm not hiding while you... His eyes cut to hers, sharp as broken glass. This is what you asked for, Cassidy. You wanted me here. Let me do what I do. Her hand fell to the pistol at her hip. She didn't look away. I didn't ask you to die. For me. He smiled, a small crooked thing that looked more like a wound than comfort. I'm not dying tonight. He swung the door open, stepping out into the frozen dark. The snow came in fits, not enough to bury the earth, but enough to make the yard look clean, honest. Cassidy stepped to the doorway, Caleb right behind her. She pressed the boy back with one hand. He stayed close, shotgun trembling in his grip. Silas stood at the edge of the porch, coat flapping in the wind. Across the yard, shapes on horseback emerged from the dark, their outlines shifting like oil on water. 6, maybe 7. Hard to tell. With the wind whipping up drifts around the fence line, one rider moved forward, face half hidden under a wide-brimmed hat crusted with frost. Phillips, Old man now, older than he'd been when he ran the line hands under coil. His voice was as dry as the prairie grass under snow. "Ward," he called. "Step aside. We'll leave you be. This is about her, the claim. Not you." Silas lifted the rifle to his shoulder, steady as the horizon. "She's mine now. That makes it my dirt. My fight." A bitter laugh from the riders. One of the younger. One still cocky enough to think this night would make him a legend spat in the snow. "Ain't no fence holds a man like me back." Silas didn't answer. He just sighted the boy down the barrel. The wind stilled for a heartbeat. Then thunder cracked the night. The shot took the young rider clean out of the saddle, landing him hard on the frozen ground. His horse bolted, kicking snow in its panic. The others tensed, rifles lifting. The yard flickered between silence and violence in the space of a breath. Cassidy saw it all from the doorway, her heartbeat so loud it drowned out the wind. Caleb leaned into her side, knuckles white on the shotgun's grip. Philip stayed seated, his horse snorting steam in the cold. "You shoot another, we torch this place. Man, woman, child, don't matter to us." Silas spoke like he was reciting scripture. "You light a match here. I'll bury every last one of you before the flame touches wood." Philip spat. "Then come down here and do it, hero." Silas stepped off the porch. Cassidy's breath snagged in her chest. She felt Caleb press tighter against her ribs. "Stay," she whispered. But the word was for her own fear, not for the man walking into the yard. Silas's boots crunched snow as he moved. He didn't run, didn't raise his voice. Just walked straight toward Phillips, the rifle steady against his hip. One of the riders flinched. A nervous horse sidestepped. Someone's spurs jingled in the hush. "You remember Deadwood, Phillips?" Silas asked. "You were there. Hired to clean up after Matthew's boys. Watched them hang children to make a point." Phillips didn't answer, but the way his jaw ticked said enough. Silas kept moving. 10 steps, 20. He passed the body of the young rider, the blood already dark on the snow. "I remember," Silas said. "I remember you tucked your tail when the smoke cleared. Rode out and built yourself a new name on old bones. You think that name matters tonight?" Phillips's horse shifted, ears flicking back. "I'm no butcher anymore. This is business." Silas stopped. Close enough now they could see each other's eyes, the lamplight from the cabin catching on Phillips's frostbitten stubble. "You're still a butcher," Silas said. "And butchers die the same as the rest." He shifted the rifle higher. Phillips's eyes widened. A flurry of movement, one rider spurred forward, rifle raised. Silas pivoted, firing once. The shot caught the man in the throat, dropping him like a stone. His horse reared, screaming, then bolted into the prairie. Chaos broke. The other riders fired, but Silas dropped to a knee, the shots hissing past his shoulder. He fired again. Another shape crumpled. Cassidy pulled Caleb back from the doorframe as bullets slammed into the wood around them. "Stay down," she hissed. She grabbed the shotgun from the boy's hands. He looked at her, wide-eyed but steady. Silas was a shadow in the yard, moving between horses and men. Each shot was measured, precise, but they were many. More than he had rounds for. One rider dismounted, crawling through the snow toward the porch. Cassidy saw the glint of his pistol in the dark. She braced the shotgun against the doorframe. When the figure rose, she fired. The blast blew him backward, his gun spinning into the snow. A voice howled from the fence line. Phillips's horse was gone, but the old man crawled toward a burning torch dropped by a fallen hand. His shaking fingers brushed the oil barrel they'd dragged to the fence. Silas saw it too late. He shouted something Cassidy couldn't hear over the wind and the blood pounding in her ears. Phillips got the torch to the oil, the flame catching. With a hungry roar, the fence line went up like dry kindling. Fire raced along the rails, licking toward the barn. The house. Cassidy stepped into the yard, the shotgun clutched to her chest. She caught Silas's eye. He was down on one knee, blood running from a fresh gash above his brow. "Get back!" He roared. "Stay inside." But the flames were too close now. The horses scattered, riders pulling back. Some fled, some fell. Phillips was gone, swallowed by the blaze he'd lit. The fire chewed through the fence, crawling toward the porch. Cassidy grabbed Caleb, hauling him behind the barrels stacked by the wall. She pressed the shotgun into his hands. "If anyone comes through that fire, you shoot. Don't look for me. Don't wait." The boy's eyes filled, but he nodded. Outside, Silas dragged himself upright, one hand pressed to his bleeding head. The wind shifted, blowing the flames back just enough to clear a path. He limped toward the porch, eyes locked on Cassidy. She ran to him, boots slipping in the mud. She got under his arm, her shoulder taking his weight. Together, they staggered. Back up the steps, the fire snapping at their heels. Inside, the walls rattled with heat. Smoke seeped through the cracks. Caleb crouched by the door, shotgun balanced across his knees. Silas looked at the boy, then at Cassidy, his breath ragged. "We hold the house. That's all that matters. They want the land, they have to bury us inside it." Cassidy wiped the blood from his face with her sleeve. "Then they'll need more fire." Outside, the fence fell in a shower of sparks. The prairie beyond glowed orange and hungry, but the cabin stood, a black shape against the ruined dot inside. 3 hearts beat like war drums. A woman. A man. A boy who'd learned too soon that courage was forged in flame. They waited for dawn. And whatever came with it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The fire outside hissed and spat as the snow turned to steam. Smoke coiled under the eaves, thick enough to sting Cassidy's eyes where she crouched by the window. She could taste the fire in her throat, sharp and bitter like betrayal. Silas was a dark shape in the flickering glow, pacing slow behind the barricade of upturned tables and barrels. Caleb sat wedged between them, the shotgun braced across his knees. His eyes were wide and raw but not empty. Not anymore. The night dragged its claws across the roof. Each crack of wood splitting in the fence felt like a promise snapping. Cassidy pressed the back of her hand to her mouth to keep from coughing too loud. If they heard them, they'd know they hadn't run. That was the last truth they had left. "We stay." Silas stopped by the door, the rifle resting in the crook of his good arm. The bandage at his brow was dark with fresh blood, but he didn't flinch. He stared at the door as if he could see the men beyond it, Phillips's ghosts, drifters hungry enough to pick a carcass clean. The wind howled, catching the flames and tossing sparks against the porch rails. Any second now, a stray ember could find the old roof and end it all. Cassidy swallowed the lump in her throat. "You should sit. Let me change that bandage." Silas's eyes cut to her, pale, hard. "You see me dead on my feet before this is done?" She flinched at the bite in his voice, but didn't back down. "I see you bleed out standing guard over dirt that doesn't care one bit for your blood." A shadow of a smile tugged at his mouth. "Ain't for the dirt. It's for you." Her heart ached at that. She crossed to him, fingers brushing the frayed edge of his sleeve. "Don't say things you can't keep." He leaned close enough that she felt his breath in her hair, smoky and warm. "Ain't a promise, Cassidy, just the truth." She wanted to kiss him. God help her, in that moment, she did. But Caleb stirred behind them, the scrape of the shotgun shifting on the floorboards. She pulled away before the urge got its claws too deep. A sound rose over the wind, a voice, low and mean, drifting from the tree line beyond the yard. "Ward, widow, you still breathing in there?" Silas stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor. He kicked the door open wide enough to stand in its frame. the cold air swirling it around him. Cassidy pressed a palm to Caleb's shoulder to keep him down. Outside, the snow glowed orange in the firelight. 3 men stood at the edge of the fence's blackened skeleton. She recognized one Jonah Ellis, who used to fix saddles in town before he'd fallen in with Phillips's kind. His eyes glowed like cinders in the dark. "Got an offer," Jonah called. "Come out now, guns down. We'll let the woman and the boy go. You ride west. Never come back." Silas laughed a short, sharp sound that made Cassidy's spine straighten. Same lie Coyle told when he rode in the first time. Same lie Phillips spit before he lit himself up like a bonfire. Jonah spat into the snow. "Ain't a lie if you ain't worth the trouble to kill." Cassidy felt rage flare so hot it burned away the fear. She shoved past Silas onto the porch, her coat flaring behind her like wings. "This land's worth enough to die for. And if you want it so bad, you'll have to bury every stone of this house with us inside it." Jonah's smile was a rotted thing. "Have it your way, missy. We got enough oil left for the barn. Maybe that'll loosen your tongue." Caleb's voice cracked behind them. "The horses." Cassidy's breath hitched. "Of course. The last 2 Mares, Holden's bloodline. What little they could trade when winter thawed. If the barn went up, it would take them with it. All they'd fought for would burn to ash." Silas's hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her. He whispered so low she barely heard. "I'll push them back. Get to the barn. Save what you can." Cassidy turned to him, eyes wide. "They'll gun you down." He gave her that half smile again, the one that looked like it hurt to wear. "Not if I gun faster." The first rifle cracked before she could argue. Wood splintered at the porch rail. Silas fired back. Each shot a thunderclap that lit the yard in flashes of brutal clarity. Jonah ducked behind a fence post that barely stood upright. Another man ran low, torch sputtering in his hand, making for the barn. Cassidy didn't think. She bolted across the porch, boots slipping in the slush. She heard Silas shout, but didn't catch the words. The world narrowed to that one shape fire in his hand, her horses behind the stall door, the baby inside her kicking like it knew. Everything she was about to risk. She caught the man just as he reached the barn wall. He turned, eyes wide, torch swinging. She raised her pistol, thumbed back the hammer. He dropped the torch and lunged for her, knocking her sideways into the snow. The cold sucked her breath away. She scrambled up, teeth bared, and drove her. Knee into his gut. He howled, doubled over, fingers clawing for the pistol she'd dropped. A gunshot cracked behind her. The man jerked, went limp. She looked up to see Caleb standing at the edge of the porch, the shotgun braced awkwardly on the railing. His shoulders shook, but he didn't look away from the body. Cassidy's breath caught. She crawled to the dropped torch, stamping it into the snow until it hissed out. Smoke curled around her knees like a prayer answered too late. Silas's voice bellowed over the yard. "Inside now." She grabbed the dead man's rifle, stumbling back toward the porch. Caleb was already reloading, fingers fumbling shells. Into the shotgun. Silas caught Cassidy's arm, hauling her back through the door. He slammed it shut, barred it with his shoulder as another round hit the frame. The fire crackled outside. But the barn hadn't caught. Not yet. Not tonight. Cassidy dropped the stolen rifle on the table, chest heaving. Caleb stood frozen by the hearth, shotgun clutched tight, eyes wide and wet. "You did good," she said, her voice raw. "You did good, Caleb." The boy nodded once, then sank to the floor like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. Silas pressed his forehead to the door. Breath ragged. "They'll pull back, regroup, come at dawn." Cassidy stepped close, laying a hand over his on the door. "Then we hold till dawn." His eyes found hers. There was no promise there. No lie that this would end clean. Just the truth they'd carried from the start. Some storms you survive, because you stand in the middle of them with your feet planted and your teeth bared. Outside. The wind screamed across the burned fence line. The cabin creaked, boards rattling like old bones. Cassidy pressed her palm to the swell of her belly and whispered to the child within, words that tasted like salt and smoke, "Not tonight, not ever." And in the heart of the firelight, 3 shadows waited for the world to come for them, together and unbroken. Dawn rose over the prairie in bruised shades of gray, like the world itself was waiting to see who would crawl out of the ashes still breathing. Cassidy stood at the window, palms pressed flat to the glass. Her breath left fog on the pane, but it didn't warm the chill that had settled in her bones sometime before midnight. Silas sat at the table, the rifle laid across his knees, head bowed. Blood had dried at his hairline, crackling when he moved. The wound itched, but he didn't care. He could feel the storm pressing at the edges of the yard, could taste the violence that dawn would bring. This wasn't a siege anymore, it was a test. How much of yourself are you willing to spend before you've got nothing left to give? Caleb was a huddled shape by the hearth. He'd stopped trembling sometime after the last shot was fired, but hadn't spoken a word since. His hands still smelled like powder and the tang of spilled life. Cassidy wished she could scrub that smell away, but some things you carried forever. She should no doubt the knock at the door was soft, almost polite. It crawled under her skin like ice. Silas shifted, raising his head. His eyes found hers. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Cassidy grabbed the shotgun propped by the wall, checked the shells again, though she knew every chamber by heart. She stepped behind Silas as he moved to the door. The knock came again. This time it wasn't polite. 3 raps hard, sure. The sort that said, "We're done talking." Silas cracked the door wide enough to see the shape on the other side. A man stood there alone, a battered hat low over eyes dark as creek mud. His coat was dusted white with snow. When he spoke, his voice was rough but calm. "Ward, Cassidy." Cassidy stiffened at her name on his lips. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, eyes flicking to the barricade behind them. The boy curled up like a wounded thing. "Name's Malden. I used to ride for Phillips. Now I don't." Silas's jaw flexed. "You here to finish what your boss started?" Malden shook his head. "Phillips is gone. His dogs are scattered. But there's worse than him sniffing around now." Cassidy stepped forward. "Worse?" Malden's eyes found hers. "Riders from out west. Bounty men, loan collectors. Word's gone. Out there's gold in your claim. Might as well have lit a beacon. They'll keep coming till the ground's sour with blood." Silas felt something sink cold and heavy in his chest. "And you? What's your stake?" Malden shrugged. "Phillips owed me wages. Dead men don't pay debts. I figure I got nothing left worth saving, 'cept maybe my soul." Cassidy barked a short, humorless laugh. "And you think saving us buys you that?" Malden's face didn't move. "Not saving you. Giving you a chance to run. I got word. There's a freight line crossing south. You get to it, you disappear. You stay here. They'll come and come again till they're picking your bones out of the snow." Caleb stirred then, pushing himself up on shaky legs. "No." His voice cracked, but it carried. "We ain't running." Malden looked at him like he was measuring a calf for slaughter. "Brave words, boy. You think they'll matter when they gut you for your boots?" Caleb's fists balled at his sides. Cassidy stepped to his shoulder. "You heard him. This land is ours. It was Holden's. It's mine now. And if the prairie wants my bones, it can have 'em. But I won't give 'em up easy." Silas grunted approval, low in his throat. He studied Malden's face, searching for any twitch of deceit. Found none. Just a man worn thin by wrong turns and bad debts. "You stayin'?" Silas asked him. Malden hesitated. His hand went to the revolver at his hip, fingers tapping the worn grip. "Ain't my fight. But I'll stay till the sun's up proper. Then you're on your own." Cassidy nodded once. "Then we stand till the sun's up proper." After that, we'll see. They let him in. He stomped the snow from his boots, glanced around the room like he was counting exits. Silas handed him a tin cup of water. Malden took it, eyes landing on Caleb. You ever shot a man before last night? Caleb stared at him. Yes. Malden's mouth twitched something like a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you know, ain't no glory in it. Just blood you can't wash off. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves like the prairie was telling secrets only the desperate could hear. Cassidy sat on the floor beside Caleb, arm looped around his shoulders. He leaned into her, eyes drifting closed. The shotgun lay across both their knees, a cold weight they'd chosen to carry together. Silas stepped to the window, peering through the frost. Shapes flickered at the edge of dawn. Riders. 3? 4. Hard to tell through the smoke and snow. He felt the barrel of the rifle press against his palm like a question. How many more times can you pull this trigger before the world pulls it back? Malden moved beside him, pulling a battered spyglass from his coat. He peered through it, jaw tightening. They ain't drifters. These ones are meaner, paid to drag you out alive if they can. Dead if they must. Silas's mouth was a hard line. Then they'll be disappointed. Cassidy looked up. How long? Malden closed the spyglass, slipping it back into his coat. They'll test the fence first. See what burns, what breaks. Then they'll push. You got a few minutes to decide how you want to greet him. Silas turned to Cassidy. You could still go. Back way. Take the boy. Malden'll show you. She stood, lifting the shotgun. And leave you to bleed out on the porch? Not my style, Ward. Something in his chest cracked, then something he'd kept locked up since the day he'd watched his brother die with a bullet in his back. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. You're stubborn. Her mouth curved, sharp as a blade. Takes one to know one. Caleb pushed to his feet, shotgun in his hands again. He nodded at Malden. Where you want me? Malden's eyes flicked to Silas. He's your boy now. Silas bristled at that. Not my boy, he wanted to say. But the words died behind his teeth. He laid a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Stay low. Watch the window. Anyone crosses the fence, you aim center mass. You don't think, you don't wait. Caleb swallowed. I won't miss. Malden chuckled, mirthless. Kid's got iron in him. Might live long enough to hate it. Outside, a shout rose ugly, taunting. A shot cracked the morning open. Wood splintered above the window, showering Cassidy with dust and paint chips. She didn't flinch. She braced her shoulder against the frame, shotgun ready. Silas stepped to the door, rifle in hand, Malden at his side. The house seemed smaller now, all walls and shadows, and the ragged edge where courage meets survival. Cassidy's voice was low, meant only for them. This ends today. Silas didn't turn, one way or another. The second shot came like a promise. The yard erupted with riders surging through the burned fence line, their shapes blurred by the swirling snow. Malden stepped out first, firing 2 shots that dropped a horse and threw its rider into the slush. Silas moved next, pivoting, firing, pivoting again. Each pull of the trigger felt like ripping threads from an old wound that would never heal right. Cassidy's world shrank to the window, the muzzle of the shotgun, the shape that stumbled through the fence dragging a rifle low. She fired once. The figure dropped, rolling toward the shadows. She racked the pump, her breath ragged. Beside her, Caleb fired from the other window. The blast threw him back on his heels, but the shot found its mark. A man dropped to his knees, clutching his gut dot in the blur of smoke and snow and blood. Cassidy found Silas's eyes. He stood in the yard, rifle raised, Malden at his shoulder. The 2 men looked like something older than sin, older than the land they bled for. Another shout. Another shape fell. And in that heartbeat between one shot and the next, Cassidy felt something shift inside her, like a door that had been wedged open by grief, had slammed shut on fear for good. Holden, she thought, you're gone, but I'm still here. And they will not take this from me. Outside, the wind screamed like a thing alive. But in the cabin, 3 souls held the line, every heartbeat saying the same thing. Not yet. Not tonight. Not ever. The smoke that clung to Cassidy's clothes wasn't just from the burning fence anymore. It was the reek of gunpowder, sweat, the sharp metallic bite of blood you couldn't wash out no matter how long you stood in the creek. She braced her back to the window frame, eyes fixed on the yard beyond where the last of the drifters had scattered. For now, inside, the cabin felt too small for the war they'd made it carry. Caleb sat on the floor near the hearth, knees pulled tight to his chest, shotgun across his lap. His eyes were red but dry. No tears left now. Malden crouched by the door, reloading with the calm of a man who'd stopped caring if he lived or died a long time ago. Silas leaned against the table, one hand pressed to the fresh graze along his ribs. The cloth pressed there was warm and slick, but he grinned anyway when he caught Cassidy watching. "Missed my heart," he rasped, voice raw from shouting orders that kept the line from breaking. Lucky bastards never could shoot straight. Cassidy wanted to say something. Something brave, something that would push back the weight pressing down on her chest, but the words stuck. Instead, she crossed the room, tugged his hand away, and checked the wound herself. It wasn't deep, but it would open easy if he kept. Throwing himself at death like he thought it was a lover waiting for him out there in the smoke. "Sit down," she ordered. Silas didn't argue. He sank onto the bench like a man who'd finally admitted he wasn't made of stone. His breath hitched when she pressed the clean rag to his side, but he didn't flinch. Malden watched them from the corner. One eye squinted against the rising sun creeping through the gaps in the wall. "They'll regroup," he muttered. "Ride in heavier. Or torch the place with you in it." Cassidy shot him a look sharp enough to cut him in half. "Then we kill them heavier, or we drag them down with us." Malden shrugged. "A woman ready to die is a harder thing to fight than any army, but you've still only got one door. One fence, one line in the dirt." Silas barked a laugh that turned into a cough. "Ain't much of a fence anymore." Caleb lifted his head then. "What if we don't wait for them?" Cassidy stilled. "What are you saying?" The boy's hands clenched on the shotgun. "What if we take it to them? Catch them before they light another torch? Before they circle back with more guns?" Malden tilted his head, studying Caleb like he'd just sprouted a second shadow. "How old are you, boy?" 12. "Talk like a man twice that. You got the stones to shoot a man when he's sleeping?" Caleb didn't blink. "If he's coming for my family, he don't deserve to wake up." Silas caught Cassidy's eye. The boy's word made her chest twist. Not because they were wrong, but because they were true. This place had hardened him faster than any winter ever could. She brushed her palm across Caleb's hair. "Where?" she asked Malden. "Where do we find them before they find us?" Malden ran a hand over the stubble. At his jaw. "There's an old shack down by Widow's Creek. Half these drifters came through there for whiskey and warmth before they decided they'd rather take yours. I reckon they're holed up there now, licking wounds, making plans." Silas grunted. "How far?" "Half a day if you ride hard. You'll need to be quiet. In and out before they know the prairie's turned on them." Cassidy's hand drifted to her belly. She felt the child shift there, restless in the quiet. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You ride with us?" Malden looked away, as if the window might give him an answer that didn't hurt. "I said I'd stay till the sun was up. That's now." "But hell," he pushed himself to his feet, checked the rounds in his revolver. "Might as well see this storm through." Caleb stood too. He looked small in the cabin's half-light, but the way he squared his shoulders said he'd grown in places no child should. Cassidy touched his cheek. "You're not riding with us. You stay, guard the door. Guard the land." The boy's chin trembled, but he didn't argue. "If they come?" Silas pushed himself up, wincing. He clapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You know what to do. Fence line, bottleneck. You hold him long enough for the prairie to swallow him whole." Cassidy slipped outside first. The morning air cut through her sweat and grime like ice. The sun was just a smear behind thick clouds, but the sky was wide and waiting. She saddled Holden's old roan, feeling the saddle creak under her palm. Malden rode up beside her, his horse a swayback thing that looked ready to collapse but always managed one more mile. Silas mounted last. He gripped the reins one-handed, the other pressed tight to his ribs. Cassidy looked at him, searching for a crack in that stubborn shell. Found one in the tired curl of his lips. "You ready?" she asked. He spat into the dirt. "Ready as I ever was to kill a man," Malden snorted. "Ain't killing, that's the trick. It's living with it when you ride back." They left the yard at a trot. The burned fence line passed under them like a scar they'd chosen to keep open. Caleb stood on the porch, the shotgun hugged to his chest. He didn't wave, didn't shout. Just watched them vanish into the prairie haze. The ride to Widow's Creek was a fist clenched in Cassidy's chest. Every hoofbeat felt like another chance for the world to swallow them. They spoke little, only the rustle of dry grass, the occasional snap of a branch under the horses' feet. When they finally reached the rise overlooking the shack, Cassidy's pulse thudded in her ears like a war drum. The shack was barely standing 2 walls, a sagging roof, smoke curling from a half-dug pit out back. 3 horses were tied to a hitch, heads down, tails flicking at flies. 2 shapes moved near the door. One of them, skinny, slouched, turned, and spit into the dirt. Silas leaned over in the saddle, his eyes narrowed. "Phillips's last dogs. Won't have a pack to run back to after today." Malden checked his revolver again. "We go in slow, quiet, 1 shot, then the next. No second guesses." Cassidy swung down, pulling the rifle from her saddle scabbard. The wood felt warm in her hands, like it had soaked up every word, every prayer she'd whispered into the night. They crept down the rise, boots sinking into the soft earth. Malden took the far side, circling toward the pit. Silas stayed at Cassidy's shoulder, his breath ragged but steady. When they reached the broken fence around the shack, they paused. The 2 men outside hadn't noticed. One leaned against the doorframe, the other poked at a pot balanced over the fire pit. Cassidy lifted the rifle, sighted along the barrel. She felt Silas's hand on her back, solid. The way a foundation holds a house up through every storm. "You got this," he murmured. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, bucked. The man at the door crumpled, his body folding like wet cloth. The other spun, eyes wide. Silas fired before he could shout, the shot catching him square in the chest. He dropped beside the first, blood soaking into the dirt. Malden burst through the shack's side door, dragging out a 3rd man by his collar. This one was young, pimpled cheeks, tears already streaking the grime on his face. "Inside's clear," Malden called. He threw the boy to the ground at Cassidy's feet. "Found this rat sniffing the stew." The boy tried to scramble up, but Silas's boot pinned him down. Cassidy stared at him, maybe 16, all bones and fear. He stared back like she was death walking. "You come for my home?" she asked, voice flat as the plane. He shook his head. "Didn't shoot nobody, swear." "Phillips said he'd cut my throat if I didn't ride." Silas shifted his weight. The boy whimpered. Malden watched, thumb brushing the hammer of his revolver. Cassidy knelt, close enough that the boy smelled the smoke in her hair, the dirt on her hands. "Run," she said. "Run so far you forget my name, forget this place. If I see you again." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The boy scrambled to his feet and tore off across the prairie, boots kicking up dark clods. They watched him go until the horizon swallowed him whole. Silas blew out a long breath. "Should have put him down," Cassidy stood. No, let the prairie teach him the rest. They burned the shack. Left nothing behind for the next scavenger who thought a woman alone was an invitation. When the smoke rose high enough to stain the sky, they mounted up and rode back the way they'd come. The prairie opened before them, raw and wide. A place too hard for forgiveness, but maybe not too hard for hope. Silas touched Cassidy's knee with his gloved hand. When we get home, she cut him off, voice steel and sun. When we get home, we rebuild the fence, we fix the barn, and we plant roots so deep they can't burn us out again. Malden laughed behind them, the sound rough but real. Roots! Deep enough to bury your ghost too, Ward. Silas's eyes found hers, one day at a time. They rode on, three shadows stitched tight to the land. The wind carried their scent, their sweat, their promise. This fight ain't over. But neither are we. The prairie greeted them with silence when they returned. Not the soft hush of dawn or the whisper of dry grass in the wind, but that thick, waiting quiet that settles over a place after the last blood's been spilled and the earth still, deciding whether to take more. Cassidy let her roam through the burned gap in the fence, her boots dragging furrows through the slush and ash. She'd thought it would feel like coming home. Instead, it felt like standing on the lip of a grave. They'd only half filled. Caleb was waiting on the porch, shotgun still cradled to his chest like a promise. He didn't smile when he saw them, but he didn't look away either. His eyes flicked to Malden's battered coat, to the black soot on Silas's cheek, then back to Cassidy's face. He nodded once, barely a dip of his chin, but she felt it. In her chest, all the same dot inside. The cabin stank of old fire, spent rounds, the lingering fear that clung to the walls like mold. Cassidy shrugged off her coat, feeling the baby shift under her ribs. She braced her hands on the table, breathing deep, counting to 10 until the trembling in her spine settled. Silas dropped his rifle with a thud beside her, boots scuffing the floor as he limped to the hearth. Malden stayed by the door. He looked smaller now, not just from the ride, but from whatever piece of him he'd left out there in the snow. He scraped a palm over his jaw, the stubble rasping like sandpaper. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Lucky your claim's so far out, no one wants to ride this road twice." Silas snorted. "Luck's just the name folks give the bullet that missed." Cassidy looked up at Malden. "You leaving?" He tilted his head like he was testing the weight of her words. "Never was staying. You three. You got something worse than any bounty man could bring. You got hope. And hope's heavy." Caleb's voice cracked the quiet. "You could stay. You can help mend the fence, fix the barn." "Mama says," Cassidy flinched at the word. Caleb didn't see it. Or maybe he did and used it anyway, the way a kid tests a bruise to see if it's still sore. She straightened, meeting Malden's eyes. "He's right. You've got a place here. If you want it." Malden's mouth twisted. Not quite a smile. Not quite sorrow. "A man like me don't do well with roots. Or walls that hold him in." He glanced at the shotgun in Caleb's hands, the stubborn tilt of the boy's chin. "Besides, you've got enough ghosts here without adding mine." Silas pushed himself upright, moving slow. He extended a hand. Malden took it, the shake rough but real. "You see any strays," Silas said, "send them our way. I'll bury 'em deep enough, they'll stop haunting this dirt." Malden chuckled. "Be careful what you ask for, Ward." Cassidy walked him to the porch. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes with grit. Malden looked out over the fence line, still a black scar in the white frost. "He was a good man, your Holden. Folks in town used to say he was soft. But he wasn't. He was just kind." She blinked hard. "Kindness is what got him killed." Malden shook his head. "Kindness is what got you this far. Don't forget that." He swung onto his horse, a sway-backed beast too stubborn to die. Without another word, he rode into the horizon. Cassidy watched until he was nothing more than a smudge in the dawn light. Then she went back inside. Silas had lowered himself onto the bench, one hand pressed to the bandage under his shirt. Caleb sat across from him, shotgun leaning against the table. The boy's head bobbed once, twice sleep pulling him down like a stone in a deep pond. Cassidy draped her coat over his shoulders. He didn't wake. Silas caught her wrist. His palm was warm, heavy. He called you Mama. She didn't pull away. He's a child. He needs to believe something bigger than guns is waiting on the other side of all this. Silas's thumb traced the back of her hand, rough skin on rough skin. And what about you? What's waiting for you when the shooting's done? She felt the baby shift, an elbow or heel pressing sharp against her belly. She pressed Silas's hand to that spot, let him feel the kick. His eyes went wide, then soft, like dawn cracking through storm clouds. For a moment, they just breathed. The same air held the same hope between their palms. I want fences that hold, she whispered. Fields that don't burn. A roof that doesn't leak when the rain finally comes, Silas nodded. And a man who don't bring trouble to your door? She shook her head. A man who stands on the porch with a rifle when trouble knocks. The words tasted like promise, like the shape of something new in the ashes of everything they'd lost. Caleb stirred, eyes blinking open. He saw their joined hands the way Silas's palm rested over Cassidy's belly. He didn't speak, just settled deeper into the bench. When his eyes closed again, there was no fear in them this time. Cassidy leaned over, brushing her lips across Silas's temple. When spring comes, we mend the fence, we fix the barn. We plant that damn garden Holden always wanted. Silas's laugh rumbled low. We'll need a new well. Fire's probably fouled the old one. She squeezed his hand. Then we'll dig it together. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and waiting. Somewhere out there, the wind still carried the echo of gunshots. But in this cabin, the only sound was the crackle of the hearth and the steady breath of a woman, a man, and a boy who'd survived what came for them. And when they slept, they dreamed not of graves or fires, but of fences strong enough to hold. We jump back in. Tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The thaw came late that spring, as if the prairie itself was trying to hold its breath a little longer before it let the green back in. By the time the last drift melted off the north fence line, Cassidy had learned the shape of every scar this land could wear. She'd counted every blackened post they'd have to replace. She'd counted every bullet hole in the cabin wall that needed patching. And she'd counted every breath that reminded her she was still here to do it. Silas spent the mornings by the fence, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hammer cracking out a rhythm steadier than any prayer. Caleb trailed him like a stray pup nails. In his pockets, hammer too big for his hands, but never far behind. Sometimes he'd glance over his shoulder at the cabin, at Cassidy's shape in the window, and his eyes would hold that guarded shine she'd come to know. He'd lost something out there in the snow, but what grew in its place was something harder, stronger. Maybe too strong for a boy so young, but she couldn't take that from him even if she tried. Inside, Cassidy worked the root cellar like a woman determined to make every bit of this claim pay for the blood it cost them. She scrubbed the soot off the walls until her knuckles cracked, patched the leaks in the roof with tar that stung her eyes and stuck in her hair. She did it with the baby kicking under her ribs, reminding her that what they'd built here wasn't just fences and dirt. It was breath and heartbeat and hope that refused to die. Some mornings, when the dawn came soft and pink over the plains, Silas would come inside, drop his hammer on the table, and lean against the wall like the weight of the world finally caught up to him. He'd look at her, his eyes bruised with exhaustion, and say, "Come sit with me a spell." She'd fold herself onto the bench beside him, the world narrowing to the warmth of his shoulder against hers, the rasp of his calloused palm brushing her knee. They didn't talk about the day Holden died, or the night the fence burned, or how many more guns might come sniffing around come summer. They didn't talk at all. They just breathed together, like that might be enough to keep the walls standing. One night, as spring thunder growled on the horizon, Silas came in from the yard, boots muddy and hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He found her at the table, ledger open, scribbling down what they'd need to buy if the foals came healthy and the corn took root. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You're planning like there's no war left to fight." Cassidy didn't look up. "There's always a war left to fight. That's why we plan." He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on the table, his good hand tracing the edge of the ledger. "Ain't much left in the coffers." Her eyes flicked to him. "Enough for nails and seed. Enough for next winter's salt and coffee. The rest we make ourselves." His mouth twitched. "You ever get tired?" She let her hand drift to her belly. The baby shifted at her touch. "Every minute. But tired ain't the same as beaten." They sat in the hush of that thought. Outside, the rain started, tapping at the windows like an old friend come to check the locks. The wind rattled the shutters, but the boards Silas had nailed in place held true. "Been thinking," he said finally. His voice was low, but she heard the quake under it, "about when the baby comes. You want Doc to ride out? Or I can fetch you into town when it's time." Cassidy's lips pulled into a half-smile. "You know I won't leave this place unless the prairie drags me out by the hair." Silas chuckled, a sound that made the room feel wider. "Figured you'd say that." Thunder rumbled closer. She closed the ledger, pushed it aside. "I want you here when it happens." His eyes snapped up, surprise and fear swimming behind them. "Cass, I'm no doctor." "Hell, I'm no." She reached across the table, her fingers covering his. "You're here. That's enough." His breath stilled, the fight draining out of him like a leak he couldn't plug. He turned his hand under hers, squeezed it so tight she felt her bones protest. Outside, the wind slammed the shutter open. Caleb's footsteps thumped over head-checking windows, testing latches. The boy moved like a ghost now, part child, part sentry. "He's got Holden stubborn," Silas murmured. "And your spine." Cassidy shook her head. "He's got his own. The rest is just what we gave him to stand on." They sat like that, fingers tangled, listening to the thunder crawl closer. When the lightning cracked, Cassidy felt the baby roll a sharp elbow under her ribs. A little kick like the prairie itself was trying to say, "I'm here too." "Don't count me out." Silas saw it, his eyes going wide. "Strong little thing." She smiled. "Ours." The word hung in the space. Between them, a fragile promise braced on every broken thing they'd survived. When the rain hit full force, they let it. Let the roof rattle. The wind moan through the cracks, the ghosts whisper around the eaves. They'd hold. They'd stand. And come morning, they'd mend whatever the storm tried to take. Somewhere deep in the night, as thunder rolled off to chase another horizon, Silas dozed on the bench, his head resting on her knee. She stroked his hair, her mind drifting between worry and hope, and the quiet hum of the life she'd sworn she'd protect. Dot at the window. Caleb leaned against the frame, shotgun across his shoulders, eyes wide and watching. He caught her gaze, nodded once. No words passed. None were needed. Outside, the prairie breathed. Inside, they did too. And in that hush, Cassidy felt something bloom in her chest. Not forgiveness, maybe, not yet, but the first roots of something that might grow tall enough to shade all the scars they'd buried in this land. Morning came slow, dragging a pale strip of dawn across the battered fence line. Cassidy watched the sky from the porch, her coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. The baby shifted under her ribs, a restless flutter that seemed to echo the hum of something she couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or hope twisted up so tight it hurt to breathe. Silas was already awake, boots crunching through the frost where he'd been checking the posts they'd braced the week before. His breath rose in little ghosts around his head as he drove another nail home. He worked like he owed the dirt something, like if he just hammered hard enough, the land would forgive him for all the blood it had tasted. Inside, Caleb sat by the hearth, polishing the barrel of the shotgun that never left his side now. The boy had grown taller since winter lean, but corded through the shoulders from swinging that hammer every day beside Silas. He looked up when Cassidy stepped in, his eyes flicking to her belly, then back to her face. "Cold this morning," he said, voice deeper now, but still soft when he used it on her. She nodded, shedding her coat by the door. "Spring's just reminding us it can bite when it wants to." Caleb's gaze dropped to the shotgun. He ran his palm over the stock like a prayer. "You think they'll come again?" Cassidy crossed to him, crouched so her face was level with his. "If they do, they'll find the same thing waiting as before, and maybe worse." His mouth twitched something, caught between a smile and a flinch. "I hope they do. I want them to see." She felt it then, the jagged edge of rage that lived under the boy's ribs, same place it lived under hers. She cupped his cheek, thumb tracing the bruise that still ghosted along his jaw. "You're strong enough to hold that, Caleb. Just don't let it hold you." He didn't answer. Didn't promise anything he couldn't keep. He just laid the shotgun across his knees and went back to work. Later, when the sun clawed its way higher, Silas stomped in, the wind at his back. He smelled of cedar smoke and fresh-turned dirt. Cassidy poured him coffee without asking. He dropped onto the bench, shoulders slumping as he wrapped his hands around the tin cup. "Fences holding," he said. "For now." Cassidy leaned against the table, her arms folded over the swell of her belly. "You should rest. That wound's not healed right yet." He lifted the cup, peered at her over the rim. "What about yours?" She blinked. "What wound?" He tapped his chest. "The one that keeps you up at night. The one that makes you watch the yard till the dark's gone." She looked away, her jaw tight. "This land is mine, Silas. I'll keep it safe any way I know how." His hand caught hers before she could pull back. His palm was warm, scarred, steady. "Ain't saying you shouldn't fight. Just saying you don't have to bleed alone." Before she could answer, the door banged open behind them. Caleb stood framed in the sunlight, shotgun slung over his shoulder, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Riders," he said. No fear in his voice, just the flint spark edge she'd grown to trust. "Down by the creek. 3, maybe 4. Silas was on his feet before the echo died. He grabbed the rifle leaning by the door, checked the chamber like it was second nature. "You sure they ain't just drifters?" Caleb shook his head. "One's got a scar across his eye. Same one who ran when the fence burned." Cassidy's pulse thudded in her throat. She pressed a hand to her belly, the baby kicking like it knew the storm that was coming. "They're testing us, seeing if the bones are soft enough to snap." Silas's eyes met hers. "They're gonna learn quick." They gathered what they needed, 2 rifles, the shotgun, a belt of shells that Silas had hidden under the floorboards when the first snows came. Cassidy pulled on her coat, felt the weight of the pistol at her hip like a heartbeat she could hold in her palm. Outside, the prairie wind clawed at their hair, dragged the scent of smoke and wet earth across the yard. Caleb pointed with the muzzle of the shotgun. "They're camped just past the old cottonwoods, by the bend." Silas squinted into the sun. "You stay here, high ground by the barn. If they come at us sideways, you drop them." Caleb's chin jerked up once. "Yes, sir." Cassidy felt the cold cut through her bones as she followed Silas toward the creek. Her boots slipped in the thawed mud, the grass slick underfoot. She kept her eyes on the tree line, every branch a possible shadow waiting to swallow her whole. They saw the camp before the men saw them. 4 horses tied loose to the cottonwoods, bedrolls scattered around a cold fire, and 3 men hunched low, talking like they owned the dirt they squatted on. Silas crouched low, rifle across his knee. "Last chance, Cass. We can walk back now." Fortify the cabin. Let him make the first mistake. She shook her head. First mistake's letting them think they can piss on our fence and ride out alive. His grin was pure Wolf. All right then. They moved like ghosts, two shapes stitched to the shadows. When they were close enough, Cassidy lifted her pistol, braced it with both hands. Silas stood first, rifle up, voice cold as river stone. Hands. Where I can see 'em. The men spun, eyes wide, hands flying. One reached for the revolver on his hip. Silas's shot punched through his shoulder, dropped him screaming into the mud. Another tried to bolt for the horses. Cassidy's bullet cracked the air, caught him in the leg. He fell hard, clawing. At the grass dot, the third man scar across his eye. Teeth bared like a coyote raised his palms, one finger twitching like he might still go for steel. Cassidy stepped forward. "What's your name?" He spat blood at her boots. "Who's asking?" She caught the hammer back. The sound cracked the creek bed hush wide open. "The widow you thought you'd burn out last winter." Recognition flickered across his face, fear too, but it didn't last. Men like him didn't have enough soul left to hold fear for long. He sneered. "You gonna shoot me, lady? Or you gonna let your hired gun do it for you?" Silas's voice rumbled low behind her. "You want him gone?" Cassidy's finger tightened. On the trigger, the baby shifted under her ribs. She felt the shape of who she was becoming settle like a weight in her chest. "No," she said. "I want him to ride back. I want him to tell every bastard between here and the rail line what happens when you try to bleed this land dry." The man's laugh cracked sharp. "Ain't nobody gonna believe you held all of us off. They'll come anyway." She stepped. Close enough he could see the calm behind her eyes. "Then you tell him we ain't done yet." She jerked the pistol to the side. "Go. Take your broken dogs and crawl back to whatever hole you came from." He glared at her, but he didn't argue. Fear never lasted long for his kind, but pain did. Silas kicked the downed man's revolver into the mud. Rifle trained on their backs as they staggered to their horses. When they were gone, just flecks on the horizon, Cassidy holstered her pistol. Silas leaned his shoulder against hers, his breath hot in the chill wind. "They'll talk," he murmured. "Good," she said. "Let 'em talk." They turned back toward the cabin, where Caleb waited, shotgun balanced across his knees. The barn's roof gleaming in the hard sun like a promise that no flame would touch it again. The wind whipped around them, sharp with spring's bite. Cassidy pressed her palm to the fence post as they passed through the gap, felt the wood stand firm under her touch. "We're not done yet," she thought. "Not by a damn sight." The first night after they sent the riders back to whatever hole they'd crawled from, the cabin held its silence like a secret. Cassidy lay awake on the narrow bed, one palm spread over the swell of her belly. She counted the baby's kicks like beads on a rosary, each thump a promise that the prairie hadn't taken everything yet. Outside, the wind scraped dry branches against the window. Caleb's boots scuffed the porch boards every now and then. He'd taken to pacing the front like a hound with its nose in the wind. Silas sat at the table in the main room, boots up on a chair, a shotgun propped against his knee. He hadn't said more than a handful of words since they'd come back from the creek. Didn't need to. Some things settled in the spaces between what was spoken and what was known. Cassidy drifted in and out of half-sleep until she heard Silas's voice, rough and low. She pushed herself up on an elbow. Through the cracked door, she saw him lean forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on Caleb standing just inside the doorway. "You see him out there?" Silas asked. Caleb shook his head. He looked older in the lamplight hollows under his eyes, shoulders stiff like a man twice his years. "No tracks fresh. They're gone." Silas grunted. "Good. They'll stay gone till they forget what it cost to come here." Caleb's mouth twisted. "They won't forget. They'll just bring more next time." Silas leaned back, the old chair creaking. "Then we'll greet him the same way." with iron and dirt and blood that says no further. Cassidy pulled the blanket around her shoulders and stepped into the room. She caught Caleb's eye, the way he flinched when he saw her watching. She crossed to him, rested her hand on the back of his neck. He leaned into her touch just long enough for her to feel the tremble under his skin. "Go on," she said softly. "Get some sleep, Caleb." His eyes darted to Silas, who just nodded. Caleb set the shotgun down by the door and padded off toward the loft, his footsteps light as dust. Cassidy took the chair across from Silas. The lamplight carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes were clear, no ghosts tonight, at least. Not the kind that made him flinch. "Fence is holding," he said, like he needed to say it out loud for it to be true. She folded her arms across her chest. "It'll hold until it doesn't, then we build it again." Silas's hand closed around the mug in front of him, coffee long gone cold. "It's a hell of a life, Cass." She held his gaze. "Better than no life at all." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the pulse in her wrist. "You ever wonder what it'd be like somewhere else? Land that don't fight you for every breath?" She laughed, a sharp thing that made the lamp flicker with the echo. "Somewhere else, someone else would be fighting to hold it just like we do here." "Dirt's dirt, Silas. Just got to decide which patch you'll bleed for." He let out a low chuckle. "And you chose this one." Her eyes softened. "Holden chose it. I stayed. You didn't run either." Silas went quiet, studying the scars on his knuckles. "Could've, should've maybe. But then I'd be some other man in some other saloon, still drinking myself toward the grave. Least here I know what my blood's worth." She turned her hand in his, palm to palm. His fingers were rough, warm, too big around hers. "Worth everything," she murmured. A noise at the window made them both tense, a branch tapping the glass. Nothing more. Still, Silas's free hand dropped to the shotgun, the old reflex alive in him like a bone that never healed straight. "Storm's coming," Cassidy said. She could feel it in the prickle at the back of her neck, the way the wind shifted from dry to damp in a breath. Silas nodded. "Spring rains, wash the blood off the yard." They sat that way until the lamp guttered low. The first drops pattered the roof, steady as a heartbeat. Caleb's soft snore drifted down from the loft, a reminder that even a boy grown too fast could still sleep safe under a roof he'd helped defend. Cassidy stood and squeezed Silas's shoulder. "Come to bed." He stayed where he was, staring into the dark. "I will," she didn't press him. Some demons needed a man to sit beside them in the quiet. She stepped back into the bedroom, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and listened to the rain. It drummed on the roof like an old hymn, a promise that spring might yet heal what winter broke. She drifted off to the sound of Silas's boots shifting across the floor, the soft click of the shotgun being set down. Outside, the fence stood, firm under the pounding rain. And somewhere beyond that fence, the prairie kept its secrets. Before she slipped under, she felt the baby press against her palm, one last, stubborn kick that told her tomorrow would come, and she'd be here to greet it. The rain didn't let up for 3 days. It came down in sheets that turned the yard to soup and stripped the soot from the burned fence posts until they looked like old bones, half buried in the clay. Cassidy stood at the window every morning, watching the water cut fresh ruts into the dirt they'd fought so hard to keep. She'd catch herself pressing a hand to the glass, as if she could hold the land together with her palm alone. Silas spent the worst of it in the barn, hammering new braces into the roof where the spring winds had found the leaks. He'd come in every night, soaked to the skin, hair dripping onto the floorboards, eyes hollow but alive. Caleb trailed him like a shadow, carrying buckets, handing up nails, holding the lantern steady when the thunder shook the rafters. Inside, the cabin smelled of wet earth, oil lamps, and the sweet tang of wood smoke when Cassidy stoked the fire to chase the damp from the corners. She moved slow these days, belly heavy, breath short, but she still bent to scrub the floors, patch the leaks around the windows, and drag sacks of flour up from the root cellar when the wind howled too hard. On the fourth morning, the rain finally broke. Cassidy stepped onto the porch barefoot, toes sinking into the cold mud. The sun hadn't shown its face yet, but the clouds had scattered, leaving strips of pale sky that looked clean enough to swallow. Silas appeared beside her, boots splashed with the barn's runoff, hammer still looped through his belt. He watched her study the fence line, the sagging posts leaning under the weight of the storm's last breath. "We'll fix it," he said. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders at Caleb over the roar of rain on the roof. "We always do." Cassidy didn't look at him. Her eyes tracked the line of footprints that led from the porch to the barn and back. Again Caleb's small boots beside Silas's broad strides, like a promise the world hadn't yet managed to break. "Fence ain't what I'm worried about," she said. Silas shifted, boots creaking in the muck. "Ain't the fence that keeps us safe anyway. It's us." She turned then, her eyes raw with the tired edge that had settled in since the first shot was fired that winter. "You believe that?" Silas reached out, palms settling over the curve of her belly like it was the only thing still holding him upright. "I do." The baby kicked under his hand, sharp and stubborn. He laughed a short bark that startled a crow off the fence post. "See, little one believes it too." Inside, Caleb's voice cut through the hush. "I checked the traps." He stood in the doorway, shotgun resting easy in the crook of his arm. His hair stuck up in wild tufts from the rain. "Got a hair. Maybe two if the creek don't rise." Again, Cassidy smiled, the expression carving new lines around her eyes. "Good work. Skin 'em before they go sour." Caleb nodded, but his eyes lingered on Silas's hand, still pressed to her belly. He didn't say it, but she read the worry there. How much longer? How much harder could they push before the land pushed back for good? By noon, the yard was alive, with the sound of hammers again. Silas and Caleb worked shoulder to shoulder, driving fresh posts deep where the old ones had rotted out. Cassidy watched them from the porch, her knitting half finished in her lap. The needles felt wrong in her, hands too soft for a woman who'd learned to hold a pistol steady in the dark. But she forced herself to keep going, one stitch at a time, because she needed to believe there was still a future worth warming with wool and stubborn hope. When the sun slipped behind the hills, they ate hare stew by the hearth, Caleb's hair still damp from where he'd scrubbed the mud from his neck. Silas leaned back on the bench, legs stretched out under the table, eyes flicking to Cassidy every time she winced when the baby rolled. "You all right?" he asked, voice low enough only she could hear. She forced a grin. "Better than fine. Little one's got more fight in him than all of us put together." Silas's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Gets it from his ma." Caleb set his spoon down, the scrape loud in the hush. "What happens when the baby comes?" Silas stilled, but Cassidy was already turning toward the boy. "What do you mean?" His fingers drummed the table, restless. "You'll be laid up. Silas'll have his hands full with the fence and the barn. Who watches the yard?" Cassidy's chest tightened. She reached across the table, but Caleb leaned back, eyes flashing. "I ain't a child," he said, the edge of the boy gone, replaced by something harder. "I can shoot. I can stand watch." Silas cleared his throat. "Ain't what we want for you, Caleb. You know that." The boy's eyes cut to him, sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't matter what you want. It's what needs doing." Cassidy let out a slow breath. "You're right. And you will help. But you'll help here, too, keeping that fire going, mending what needs mending. This isn't just shooting and hammering, Caleb. This is living. That's the fight that matters." Caleb's jaw twitched, but he didn't argue. He picked up his spoon again, stirring the stew that had already gone cold. Silas caught Cassidy's eye, something like gratitude shining under the worry. That night, when the wind picked up again, rattling the windows like a threat they'd grown too used to ignoring, Cassidy lay awake listening to the hush of Silas's breath beside her. His arm draped across her waist, his palm warm against her ribs where the baby stirred. She traced the old scar on his forearm with her thumb, remembering the first night he'd shown it to her, how he'd told her about the man who'd put it there, how he'd sworn he'd never run from another fight again. She kissed it now, soft as a promise. "Sleep," he murmured, half gone already. She smiled against his skin. "Someone's got to keep watch." He huffed a laugh, eyes still closed. "Ain't you, Cass? Not tonight." But she didn't sleep. Not until the wind died down and the fence stopped creaking like an old bone ready to snap. Not until she felt the baby go still, safe under her heart. She closed her eyes then, the taste of hope bitter and sweet on her tongue. Outside, the prairie waited, always waiting, but for tonight, at least it stayed quiet. Dawn broke slow and mean, the kind that crept in like a blade rather than spilling soft across the fields. Cassidy woke to the taste of copper on her tongue, a dream she couldn't quite shake, of hoofbeats and gunfire echoing through an empty house. She lay there a moment, staring at the rafters, her hand pressed to the restless swell of her belly. The baby turned under her palm, stubborn as ever, as if reminding her there were miles yet to go before she'd get to rest. The cabin smelled of coffee and smoke and old wood soaked through with the secrets of too many winters. She heard Silas's boots before she saw him slow steps, the door's hinges giving that low protest she'd learned to love. He stood there a moment, framed by the gray light, one hand braced on the doorframe like he could hold the whole world. At bay if he just leaned hard enough. "Storms past," he said, voice rough from sleep and a night spent listening for trouble. Cassidy pushed herself upright, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "Fence hold," he shrugged. "Mostly. Caleb's checking the posts. Boy's got an eye for where the ground gives." She studied him, stubble dark on his jaw, eyes ringed with shadows that never seemed to lift no matter how long he slept. "Come sit," she said. "You look like hell." Silas huffed a laugh, boots scuffing the floor as he crossed to her. He sank onto the edge of the bed, elbows braced on his knees. She reached for his hand, their fingers tangling like the roots of a tree that had weathered more storms than it had any right to survive. "You ever think we'll be done?" he asked. Cassidy tilted her head. "Done with what? This?" He nodded toward the window where the fence line sagged against the morning haze. "Fighting to hold every plank in place. Wondering which night the wind'll drag it all down again." She let out a slow breath. "Done fighting? No. But maybe the fighting changes. Maybe one day it's not about keeping men out, but keeping our people in, safe, fed, warm." Silas's thumb brushed the back of her hand. "You still believe in safe?" She turned his palm over, traced the old scar that ran from the base of his thumb to the meat of his wrist. A fight he'd never talked about, a life he'd never asked forgiveness for. Safe's just another word for worth the risk. This. She tapped his chest, then her own, then her belly. "This is worth it." He dipped his head, let her press her lips to his knuckles. The baby kicked then hard enough they both felt it. Silas's mouth curved into that grin that never stayed long enough but always came back. Like dawn after a long night dot in the yard, Caleb's voice rose, a sharp call that snapped them both out of the hush. Silas was on his feet in a breath. Shotgun lifted from the wall where it always waited. Cassidy pushed herself up, boots hitting the floor. She grabbed her coat, her pistol from the shelf, thumb brushing the cylinder like a charm against whatever waited outside. They found Caleb, crouched by the fence, one knee in the mud, his eyes flicking from the broken post to the trail that snaked off into the trees beyond. He didn't look up when they approached, just tapped the fresh splinters with the barrel of his shotgun. "Riders?" Silas asked. Caleb's mouth twisted. "No horses, boots. 2, maybe 3. Heavy. Came right up to the fence. pried the post. Out then headed south. Cassidy felt the ache behind her eyes, that cold whisper that said the world wasn't done testing them yet. Marking weak spots, Silas spat into the dirt. Or looking for a way in that don't cost him lead. Caleb's shoulders tightened. I can follow him. No. Cassidy's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. Caleb flinched but didn't argue. She laid a hand on his shoulder. They want you out there alone. You think they don't know what you mean to this place? The boy's eyes were dark hollows in the dawnlight. I ain't afraid. Silas knelt, meeting Caleb's eyes level. Ain't about fear. It's about what happens if you don't come back. You stay on this dirt, you make it cost him to. Cross it. Cassidy felt the baby shift again, pressing high under her ribs. She forced her shoulders back, her voice steady. We double the watches. Reinforce the posts. If they want to test us again, let 'em come and see what waits. They spent the day stitching the yard back together. Caleb hammered nails into new braces while Silas and Cassidy dug in the softened ground. Every post sunk deeper, every plank lashed tight with wire. When dusk fell, they ate in the yard salt pork and stale bread, and the taste of rain still clinging to their lips. When the moon crept up over the trees, Cassidy stood at the fence alone. Her coat flapped against her knees, the pistol heavy in her pocket. She could feel the land breathe under her boots, wet and raw, and still carrying the scars of every man who tried to break it. She laid her palm flat to the top rail, felt the splintered wood, the tremor that said tomorrow would come with its teeth bared. She didn't move when Silas stepped up behind her, his shadow long in the moonlight. He wrapped his arms around her, his breath warm at her ear. You ever wish we'd run? He asked, voice soft as the hush between thunderclaps. Cassidy closed her eyes, leaned back against him, the baby a solid weight between them. Every night. And every night I remember, there's nowhere worth going that don't cost more than staying. He pressed his mouth to her temple. Then we stay. They stood there until the cold chased them inside. Caleb watched from the porch, shotgun balanced across his knees, the boy already half ghost, half sentinel. Cassidy caught his eye, nodded once. He nodded back. Inside, they banked the fire low, the walls creaking like old ribs settling in for the night. Cassidy lay awake long after Silas's breath fell steady beside her, her hand tracing circles over her belly. She mouthed the promise she'd made the first night Holden laid the foundation for this place. This land is ours. If it breaks, we break with it. If it grows, we grow too. Outside, the prairie shifted in its sleep, the fence line holding fast against the dark. By the time the prairie thawed enough to smell like something living again, the fence line looked like a scar that wouldn't close. Cassidy ran her palm along the new posts each morning, counting the nails, checking the wire for rust. It was habit now, like breathing, like pressing her hand to her belly every time the baby rolled, reminding her this place was more than splintered boards and bent nails. It was the line she'd drawn in the dirt that no one would cross without paying for it in blood. Silas watched her from the yard, hammer slung through his belt, hat tipped low against the pale sun. He'd been quiet since the last set of tracks, 3 men that came up the ridge and never made it to the porch. He'd sent them back into the dirt with 2 well-placed shots and a single word when Caleb asked, what should be done with the bodies? Burn them. They didn't bury threats here anymore. Burying was too soft. Ash didn't remember names. Inside, Caleb had started patching the holes in the cabin walls himself. The boards fitted tight where old bullets had punched through. He was bigger now, taller than Cassidy had expected for a boy so thin last winter. When he looked at her, he didn't look like a child waiting for permission. He looked like someone ready to bleed for something bigger than himself. She watched him through the kitchen window as he dragged another plank up from the shed. Nails clamped between his teeth, his shoulders bunched as he hefted the hammer. She wondered if he'd still fit in her lap if he came to her with bad dreams. He hadn't done that since the night Silas killed those men by the creek. When the boards were up, Caleb came in, sweat dripping from the ends of his hair. He tossed the hammer on the table, grabbed the water jug, and drank until his hands shook from it. "Easy," Cassidy said, a ghost of a smile curling at her mouth. "You'll drown yourself." Caleb wiped his chin with his sleeve. "Better. Drowned than starved. Did you see the fence?" She nodded. "Holds better every day." He looked at her then, really looked, like he was seeing the baby under her skin for the first time. "When's it coming?" Cassidy pressed her hand to her belly. "Soon, when it's ready." Caleb's eyes flicked to the shotgun leaning against the doorframe. "What if they come before then?" "They won't," Silas said, stepping in. Behind him. He'd wiped the sweat from his brow, but not the streak of black dirt under his nails. Not yet. Not with the ground still soft enough to bury them in. Cassidy shot him a look. He shrugged. Truth wasn't always gentle. That night, the wind carried smoke from the east-burned brush, maybe, or someone's barn gone up, because a lantern tipped in the dark. Caleb slept by the door, his shotgun across his knees like a promise. Cassidy woke twice to find Silas standing at the window, boots planted wide, rifle leaning against the wall like a sleeping dog. She didn't tell him to come back to bed. She knew he would when he was ready. In the hush before dawn, she slipped outside. The grass was slick with dew, and the fence posts shone silver under the first light. She could smell the smoke clearer, now someone else's trouble, for once, but it made her skin prickle anyway. Silas found her at the fence, his coat draped over her shoulders before she even heard his boots. "You're cold." Cassidy let out a soft laugh. "I'm always cold these days. Nothing grows easy in this dirt." Silas leaned his elbows on the top rail beside her. "When the baby comes, we'll pull up the floorboards. Make a safe spot. If they come then, we'll hold them at the yard. No one touches you." She shook her head, mouth twisting. "You think they won't set fire to the roof, just to watch it fall in on us?" Silas's eyes flicked to hers, blue. "Washed pale by the coming day. Then they burn. Same as the last ones." They stood that way a long time, until Caleb's voice called from the porch. "Riders!" They turned in unison. He pointed with the shotgun barrel, 3 figures cresting the ridge at a slow walk. Too slow for raiders, too calm for drifters. Cassidy's throat went dry when she saw the shape of the lead rider, long coat flapping, hat brim low, one arm slack at his side. "Anyone you know?" she asked Silas. He didn't answer. Just spat into the dirt. "Stay here." Cassidy gripped his sleeve. "You're not going alone." His eyes flicked to her belly. "You can't. I'm not staying behind a fence while you walk into a gun," she snapped. "We ride this storm together, Silas Ward." He gave her that half-smile that looked like it hurt to wear. Always did. Caleb was already loading shells into his pocket. He looked at Cassidy, waiting for the word. She nodded once. He followed. They met the riders at the fence line, no guns drawn yet, but the air was thick with the scent of iron and old grudges. The lead rider pushed back his hat, eyes pinched against the rising sun. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, puckered white against his wind-burned skin. "Cassidy Bell," he drawled, voice like gravel under boots. "Heard you'd gone soft out here. Married a hired gun. Breeding up a crop of lambs for the slaughter." Cassidy felt Caleb flinch behind her. She didn't reach for her pistol yet. Didn't need to. Silas spoke first, voice low and cold enough to frost the fence wire. "You got business here. You best speak it fast." The man's grin showed too many teeth. "Business? Nah, just a visit. Folks in town wonder if you'd sell. Land like this could turn a profit if you'd stop spilling blood on it every season." Cassidy took a step forward, boots sinking into the churned-up mud. "This land's not for sale." The man's eyes cut to Caleb, then back to her belly. "Shame. Could've bought yourself a warm bed in town." Baby wouldn't have to grow up behind a gun sight. Silas shifted his coat, just enough to show the revolver at his hip. "You've said what you came to say." The man's grin faltered. "Last chance, Belle. You and your little war hero here walk away. Leave the fence, the stock, the well. Maybe no one follows." Cassidy's hand drifted to her pistol. "Try and take it." The man spat in the dirt. "So be it." He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode off without another word. The other two followed, eyes flat as pond water. When they were gone, Caleb exhaled hard, like he'd been holding the breath too long. "They'll be back." Silas nodded, jaw tight. "Let him. Next time they come, they better bring shovels." Cassidy pressed her hand to the fence post, felt the raw edge of the fresh-cut wood. Roots, she thought. Roots deeper than any boot heel can dig up. Behind her, the baby rolled, a slow turn that made her ribs ache. She smiled, just a sliver of something bright enough to break the dawn wide open. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The sun rose late that morning, fighting through a tangle of clouds like a boxer pulling himself off the mat. Cassidy leaned against the porch post, boots sunk ankle-deep in mud that would dry hard by afternoon. Her hand rested on the fence rail, palm pressed flat to the splintered wood, as if she could feel the pulse of the earth beneath it. Silas stood by the gate, had pulled low, watching the trail where the three riders had disappeared at dawn. Caleb sat on the steps, shotgun across his knees, thumb working at a fresh nick on the stock, a nervous habit he'd picked up after the creek fight, like he needed to remind the gun it had a job to do. "Any sign they circled back?" "Cassidy?" asked, voice low. Silas didn't turn, not yet. The baby shifted under her ribs, sharp and insistent. She pressed her free hand to the swell, feeling the heel of a foot or an elbow pushing back at the world that kept trying to claim them. Hold, she thought, a prayer and a command all at once. "Just a little longer. Fence'll hold," Caleb said. He spoke like he'd read her mind. His eyes didn't leave the yard. She almost smiled. Almost. They spent the day hardening the line. Silas and Caleb carried old planks from the barn, hammering braces across every post that leaned even a little. Cassidy worked the yard, packing the soft spots with fresh earth, her boots and hands caked to the wrist. She moved slower than she wanted, breath catching more often now, but she didn't stop until the shadows stretched long enough to remind her how short the daylight really was. Inside, she found Silas at the table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, cleaning the revolver he hadn't fired since he sent those last men back across the creek. Caleb sat on the floor by the hearth, whittling a new grip for the old rifle that had split at the stock last winter. The smell of burnt coffee drifted through the room, bitter and grounding. "You think they'll wait till dark?" she asked. Silas slid the cylinder back into place, his hands moving with the surety of a man who'd taken things apart and put them back together more times than he could count. "Dark's good for men who can't fight straight on. They'll wait till they think we're sleeping." Caleb's knife scraped slow against the wood. "Then they'll find we don't sleep." Cassidy crossed the room, laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. He stiffened for a breath, then leaned into it, just enough to tell her he hadn't drifted too far yet. "They'll come hungry," she said, meaner for waiting. "We hold the line same as before. No one gives an inch." Silas looked up at her, eyes flicking to her belly. "Except you. You give no more than you have to." She bristled, a spark she couldn't snuff out even now. "I ain't hiding." His mouth twitched. "Didn't say you were. Just said you don't give them what they want. They want you scared. They want this place to feel weak. They won't get that." She sank into the chair across from him, elbows on the table. The baby rolled again, restless as a prairie storm. "We still got enough shot?" Caleb answered before Silas could. 20 shells for the shotgun, 30 rounds for the rifle. Couple dozen for the pistols. If they come, it'll be enough. Silas let out a low breath. Enough if we don't. Miss. They ate what they could stomach, hardtack and beans, the last bit of salt pork boiled so long it tasted of nothing but smoke. Caleb picked at his portion, eyes darting to the door every time the wind kicked up. Silas didn't touch his plate, his fingers drumming the table like he could tap out a plan that kept them alive long enough to see morning. When dusk slid in, Cassidy lit every lamp they had, the glow pushing back the corners where shadows liked. Together, she caught Silas's eye across the table. Tonight, she said. They either break the fence or they break themselves on it. He tipped his head. Good plan. They took their places as the last light died. Caleb by the window, his shoulders hunched just enough to keep his silhouette low. Silas at the door, revolver loose in his grip, eyes narrowed on the yard. Cassidy moved between them, every creak of the floorboards under her boots a reminder of how much this house had already survived. When the first crack of a branch came from the far side of the fence, Caleb didn't flinch. He sighted down the shotgun barrel, breath slow and even. Wait, Silas murmured. Let 'em show their teeth. They waited. The wind carried voices low, slurred, the mean drunk sound of men who'd spent all day daring themselves to come. Then a shape rose from the brush, hat brim low, pistol hanging loose at his side. Silas's voice cut the hush. Fence holds. Tonight, take one step past that post, you're meat for the crows. The shape laughed an ugly sound, too sharp for the dark. Ain't your dirt to claim, Ward. Ain't hers either. She's just squatting on it like a dog on a bone. Cassidy stepped up behind Silas. Her hand settled on his back, steadying them both. Come take it, she called. We'll bury you in it same as the last ones. The man shifted, weight tilting to his back foot. A second figure appeared. At his shoulder, Caleb's thumb brushed the hammer back on the shotgun. The click loud as thunder in the hush. You got no claim, the man sneered. Not by law, not by birth. This land wants you gone. Silas barked a laugh. This land don't want a damn thing but blood. And we've spilled plenty. You'll do fine tonight. The man's shoulder twitched half a heartbeat of warning. Before his gun hand moved, Caleb's shot cracked the night wide open. The figure dropped, pistol clattering into the mud. The second man stumbled back, tripped over the fence rail, and scrambled into the brush like a rat who'd seen the barn cat's teeth. Silas lowered his revolver, eyes still pinned to the tree line. Next, the dark stayed quiet. The wind died down. Somewhere an owl called, lonely and distant. Cassidy felt her knees threaten to buckle, but she forced them straight. They'll come again. Silas's hand found hers. Then we do this again, and again, till they learn the fence don't break. Caleb stepped away from the window, face pale in the lamplight. He was young, he said, voice raw. Cassidy reached for him, but he flinched back. He made his choice, she said. You made yours. Don't you carry him. Caleb wiped a sleeve across his mouth. Ain't carrying him. Just wondering how many more like him are waiting in the dark. Silas's voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a blade. However many come, they'll find us here, same as they found him. They stood there as the lamps flickered, the quiet pressing in like a question they'd already answered 100 times. Stay or run? And each time, the answer was the same. Cassidy felt the baby roll again, harder this time. She pressed Silas's palm to her belly, let him feel it too. His eyes closed for a breath, then opened clear. Fence holds, he said. She nodded. Fence holds. And if it didn't, they'd hold each other. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. By the time the last of the would-be claim jumpers had gone to ground, or to their graves, the prairie had turned to spring for good. The mud hardened into ruts where boot tracks once wandered too close, the fence posts dry and splintered in. The noon sun Every plank carried the ghosts of the men who'd tested them, and every nail felt like a promise Cassidy refused to break. Inside the cabin, the walls smelled of cedar and ash and the damp sweetness of new life. Cassidy moved slow. Now, belly round and low, breath catching every time the baby shifted. Each night, she lay awake with Silas's hand on her hip, his breath warm against her shoulder as he counted out her heartbeats like they were fence posts he could shore up with enough hammer and wire. Caleb kept the yard clear. He walked the fence line at dawn and dusk, shotgun slung across his back, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He'd started carrying the revolver on his belt, too, a gift from Silas after that last night they'd fired shots through the dark. Some mornings, she caught him sitting on the porch steps, oiling the weapon with a care that looked too much like prayer for a boy his age. "Don't carry them," she'd told him once when he caught her watching. He hadn't looked up from his work. "Ain't carrying them. Just don't want to be surprised next time." She'd left it at that. Some things a boy had to bury or burn all on his own. Late one afternoon, thunderheads crawled in from the west. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and the wind picked up, stirring the prairie grass until it hissed against the fence rails. Cassidy stood in the yard, boots planted in the fresh dirt they'd turned for a vegetable patch come summer. She pressed her palm to the small of her back and felt the baby shift again, the weight of it sending a bolt of pain down her legs. "You should be inside," Silas said. His voice carried over the wind, steady and warm. He'd come up behind her so quiet she hadn't heard his boots. She snorted. "And miss watching the sky do what it does best." He eased his hand over hers, the scrape of his palm rough against her skin. "Storm will break us wide open if we let it." Cassidy leaned into him, let the heat of his chest anchor her. "Then we don't let it." Caleb's voice drifted from the porch. "Barn doors are shut tight, extra feed stacked up. Traps along the tree line are clear. If anything comes sniffing, they'll get teeth before they get through." Cassidy turned her head just enough to see him. He stood by the porch post, hair damp with sweat, boots caked in mud. He looked older in the stormlight, but when the thunder cracked, he flinched just the same as he had when he was 10. Silas caught that. "Flinch. Go check the back fence again. Make sure the posts are braced." Caleb hesitated, eyes flicking to Cassidy. She nodded once. He took off at a jog, boots sinking in the soft ground. Silas watched him go. "He'll make it, won't he?" Cassidy reached up, caught his jaw in her palm. "He's already made it. Rest is up to him." They went inside when the first drops hit, hard as gravel on the roof. The wind rattled the shutters, and the smell of wet earth seeped in through the gaps in the chinking. Cassidy settled into the old rocking chair by the hearth, breath coming shallow now, each roll of the baby feeling sharper than the last. Silas crouched at her feet, boots braced wide, hands resting gentle on her knees. "We're close, ain't we?" She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Close enough. Just not tonight. Let the storm pass first." He rested his forehead against her knee. "Storm's been here since the day you married me." She threaded her fingers through his hair, felt the scar on his scalp where Holden's old shovel handle had cracked him that first spring. "No, Storm was here long before that. We just learned how to stand in it." A boom of thunder rattled the walls. Caleb pushed through the door, soaked to the bone, cheeks pink from the cold. He leaned the shotgun by the door, kicked off his boots, and dropped to his knees by the fire like a boy half his age. "Fence line's clear," he said. "No tracks, nothing moving but wind." Cassidy studied him, the way his shoulders hunched under the weight of the day. She wanted to tell him he could lay it down, just for tonight. But then she felt the baby kick, a hard, insistent thud against her ribs, and she knew there'd be no rest for any of them until the last root was sunk deep enough to hold. Silas stood, crossed to Caleb, dropped a rough palm on the boy's hair. "Good work." Caleb leaned into the touch for a breath before jerking away, eyes flicking to Cassidy. If they come back, we won't have enough shot, Silas nodded. We'll have enough. The boy's jaw twitched, the fight in him simmering just under the skin. You don't know that. Cassidy shifted in the rocker, a sharp bolt of pain making her gasp. Both men turned to her in an instant, Caleb's eyes wide, Silas's face carved from stone. It's fine, she managed. Just the storm rattling. The cage. Silas dropped to his knees again, one hand on her belly. The baby rolled, pushing back at his palm like a stubborn calf, refusing to be penned. You rest, he said. I'll sit watch tonight, she caught his wrist. No, we watch together. Caleb moved to the window, cracked the shutter. The yard lay quiet under the hammering rain. Beyond the fence, the prairie looked like a black ocean waiting to swallow whatever dared float too close. They're out there, he said. I can feel Em watching. Silas didn't look away from Cassidy. Then let him watch. Let him see what it costs to cross this dirt. Cassidy laid her head back, eyes slipping closed for a breath. Let him come, she thought. Let. And try. Outside, the thunder rolled off into the hills. The fence held its line against the wind. And in the hush that settled after, the baby went still waiting, same as them, for whatever tomorrow meant to take. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The last storm broke at dawn. It dragged itself out of the night like an old dog refusing to die, rattling the shutters and driving rain into the fresh chinked gaps in the cabin walls. Cassidy lay in the rocker by the hearth, hair slicked to her temples, the blanket damp under her knees. Every roll of thunder seemed to echo the sharp twists in her belly contractions, the word Doc Green used when he still rode the circuit before he'd vanished back east to bury his own ghosts. She remembered his hands clean, sure, always smelling faintly of whiskey and pipe smoke. Silas was a different kind of calm. He knelt beside her, palms spread flat over her knees, thumbs tracing circles in time with her breath. Outside, Caleb moved between the fence and the porch, a shadow with a shotgun and eyes like flint. Each time he passed the window, Cassidy felt the weight lift from her ribs, just a little, just enough. She'd lost count of how many storms they'd faced together. The blizzards that cut the herd down to bones and sinew. The men who came with fire in their hands and hate in their mouths. The nights when the prairie itself felt like an enemy, whispering that the fence was just a line the wind would blow away. But this was different. This storm was hers to ride out alone. Silas pressed a rag to her forehead. His voice was sanded smooth by years of bad whiskey and worse regrets. Breathe with it, Cass. Don't fight the pain. It ain't your enemy. She barked a laugh that cracked her ribs. I know my enemy, Silas Ward. This one just won't shoot straight. His grin was a fleeting thing, like the sun on a bitter January morning. He leaned in, pressed his mouth to her knuckles. You hear Caleb out there? Boys built the whole fence around you. She swallowed back the taste of bile and fear. Fence won't keep this out. He kissed her hand again. No, but it'll keep the rest at bay while you do your part. Outside, the wind shifted. Caleb's voice rose a single sharp bark. That cut through the last drumbeat of thunder. Then boots on the porch, the creak of the door. He stepped in, hair plastered to his forehead, the shotgun cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. Ridge is clear, he said. No tracks. They're either dead or smarter than we figured. Silas looked up. Good, you keep watch from the window. If you see anything move, you don't ask questions. Caleb didn't flinch. He just nodded, dropping to one knee beside Cassidy before he moved away. His hand found hers, clumsy and warm. You need me, you call. I'll be here. She squeezed his fingers. I know you will. Hours slipped by in a haze of thunder and pain. The rain eased, tapping the roof like a tired hand. Cassidy drifted in and out sometimes. She was in the rocker, Sometimes she was on the cabin floor, Silas's arms braced around her shoulders, Caleb's voice whispering that the fence still held, that the prairie hadn't taken them yet. When the first cries came, they were raw and wet and alive. They cut through the hush like a rifle crack in the dark. Cassidy fell back against Silas's chest, her breath coming ragged, her eyes fixed on the dawn that broke wide and gold through the open door. Caleb stood there, shotgun forgotten, tears streaking the mud on his cheeks. He looked at the baby in Silas's arms, tiny, red-faced, wrapped in an old flannel that still smelled faintly of wood smoke. Cassidy reached for Caleb's hand. "Go on, say hello." He stepped forward, knelt by her side. His fingers brushed the baby's downy head, tentative, reverent. "Strong," he whispered. "Look strong." Silas's rough laugh rumbled through her back. "Takes after his ma." Cassidy closed her eyes for a moment, the exhaustion like an ocean pulling her under. But she surfaced when Caleb spoke again. "Fence'll hold," he said. Not a question. This time, a vow. She opened her eyes, found Silas watching her, hope and fear, and something gentler than either shining in the blue that the prairie hadn't yet bleached away. "We've held it this long," Cassidy said. "Longer still now." They laid the baby in a basket by the fire. Caleb settled on the floor, back to the wall, shotgun across his knees. Silas propped himself in the rocker, one boot braced against the floor to keep it steady when the wind rattled the shutters. Cassidy watched them both, the boy who'd grown roots deeper than any fence post, the man who'd hammered every plank and every promise into this stubborn dirt dot in the hush. The baby stirred, a soft sound like the prairie, itself sighing through the grass. Cassidy reached down, brushed a fingertip across the tiny cheek dot outside. The wind changed again, gentler now, carrying the smell of thawing earth and distant wildflowers. It rattled the fence boards, but they held. They always would, she settled back, Silas's coat draped over her shoulders. Caleb's eyes flicked to her every so often, steady and sure. The baby slept on, the weight of generations cradled in a cedar box lined with scraps of old wool. The prairie would come for them again, fires, storms, men with guns and empty words, but for now the dirt was theirs. The fence line held. The roots ran deep, and under the hush of the newborn's breath, Cassidy let herself believe they'd carved something out of the wild that even the wind would think twice before trying to tear down. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.